Chapter 9:11. While everyone else was entangled by these messy matters, only Merlin was paying attention to Wuming with a clear mind. He felt that Wuming's expression at the moment was a bit similar to how he felt when he faced Artoria. Although the target was different, Wuming did give Merlin such a feeling at the moment. A worried old father. That's right, Wuming at the moment seemed to be worried about his disobedient daughter. Wuming was indeed worried. Everyone in Mesopotamia knew that Ishtar was spoiled by the gods. Although she was a good god, she always did evil things. Back then, the reason why Wuming came to the Uruk was mainly because Wuming was tricked by Morgan Le Fay. By chance, he forcibly unlocked the bloodline of the Origin of Dragon, allowing Wuming to use the body of the Origin of Dragon when he was still a minor. However, at that time, Wuming was too accustomed to the body of the Origin of Dragon, and the awakening of the bloodline was not perfect. He could not control the body almost perfectly like Wuming now. In any case, Wuming awakened the Origin of Dragon by accident. In addition, Wuming was indeed injured at that time. Otherwise, Wuming would not have hidden to recuperate and use the statue that people made for him as his eyes to observe the Uruk. After that, Wuming used this eye to observe Ishtar's series of evil deeds. Wuming did not hate Ishtar, or rather, Wuming did not hate anyone, provided that no one provoked him. As long as no one provoked him, everything was fine. Wuming's attitude towards Ishtar was the same. As long as Ishtar did not provoke him, he would not pay attention to Ishtar. However, things did not go as planned. Ishtar would do some troublesome things from time to time. Not only did she easily provoke Wuming, but the Uruk citizens also always prayed to Wuming. The content of the prayers was not excessive like getting rid of Ishtar, but they were basically complaints about Ishtar and begging Ishtar to stop her evil deeds. Wuming was respected and worshipped by the citizens of Uruk and even Mesopotamia. When Ishtar really crossed the line and provoked him, Wuming would teach her a lesson. For example, he would beat Ishtar up and chase her out of the Uruk. At that time, Wuming was completely unfamiliar with his dragon body. He did not have a certain degree of understanding and development. Naturally, he was not that strong, but he was not so weak that he could not even defeat Ishtar. Logically speaking, Wuming's dragon body would only be completely restored after reaching adulthood. By chance, Wuming's dragon body was unlocked in advance, and it could be regarded as a considerable increase in strength. However, even if Wuming defeated Ishtar, the Sumer gods were still around at that time. Even if it was a lesson, Wuming could not go too far. Even if the Sumer gods were afraid of Wuming's identity, if he did not give them face and taught Ishtar a lesson, who knew what the Sumer gods would do in the end? Even a cornered dog would jump over a wall, let alone a group of gods. Therefore, Wuming, who was not invincible, had to learn to be moderate. Besides, it did not mean that he had to use force to teach. Most of the time, wisdom was better than force, especially when facing Ishtar, the spoiled mistress of the heavens. Wuming found that it was particularly easy for him to use his brain to deal with her. However, it was as if she had forgotten the pain after the scar healed. After a few days, she would naturally return as if nothing had happened. God Un, who was also Ishtar's father, once came to look for Wuming, and the two had a short conversation about Ishtar. It was nothing more than taking care of Ishtar, saying that she was still young and immature, and so on. Godin was like a parent meeting the class teacher. However, every time Wuming talked about Ishtar's mistakes, the other party would always smile and change the topic, constantly asking Wuming to help take care of Ishtar. This made Wuming very helpless. After all, even if you asked Wuming to take care of Ishtar, he could not do so. After all, Ishtar did not have the slightest respect for Wuming. To put it simply, Ishtar would not listen to Wuming at all. It was like a naughty student being reprimanded by the class teacher. On the surface, they would say that they would change, but afterward, they would forget everything they promised. Ishtar was obviously such a student, and whether it was in the open or in the dark, she did not show the slightest willingness to be obedient. She still did things her own way, and in the end, she became even worse. The Bowl of Heaven incident was the embodiment of Ishtar's worsening behavior. However, it was not only bad. Ever since the Bull of Heaven incident, Ishtar had a trace of fear for Wuming. Although Ishtar herself was not aware of it, Wuming obviously noticed it. Wuming also had a big prejudice against Ishtar because she indirectly released the Bull of Heaven. Therefore, after that incident, Wuming became stricter with Ishtar. Ishtar, who had a trace of fear, was also frightened by Wuming's strictness. Gradually, she did not return to Uruk. This was probably the origin of the legend that Uruk Hyunryong was the Uruk city god who stole Ishtar. Not long after that, the gods gradually separated from humans and gradually left the human world. Wuming also left Uruk with Enkidu, who was opportunistically avoided death by himself. However, after the Bull of Heaven incident, the nature of the relationship between Wuming and Ishtar did indeed change. Especially now that Ishtar appeared as a pseudo-servant, the special relationship between the two became even more obvious. If one had to describe it, it was like the relationship between a melancholy homeroom teacher and a naughty student had changed to an old father and a spoiled daughter. Because there was still kindness in Ishtar's bones, and Wuming's previous actions were also good intentions. After the gods disappeared, Ishtar, who appeared as a pseudo-servant in this world, had a feeling of dependence on Hyunryong, who used to be very strict with her. It was like a naughty student whose father was in trouble would subconsciously ask for help from their neighbor who used to take care of them and teach them a lesson. However, neither of them noticed this, otherwise, things wouldn't have turned out this way. Merlin, as a bystander, saw through everything. This was probably the so-called the onlooker sees the game more clearly. Villo-senpai, what should we do next? Anyway, Matthew thought that her brain couldn't think anymore. This series of events made Matthew at a loss, and she didn't know what to do next. Continue to climb the mountain. Wuming pointed at the faintly visible palace on the mountain, and then immediately moved. Since we're already here, if we don't bring Ishtar back, I'll feel bad no matter how I think about it. However, as soon as Wuming finished his sentence, the entire Abith mountain shook violently. Chapter 9:12. What's going on? Gudatsi, who lost her balance and almost fell, could not help but look at Wuming. Oh, it seems to be an Abifu's spirit. Merlin looked thoughtfully in a certain direction on the mountain and said in surprise, Abifu's spirit. Gudatsi and Matthew were full of doubts about the so-called Abifu's spirit. What is that? A monster? A ghost? However, at the next moment, as if responding to Gudatsi and Matthew's doubts, a super huge magical pig rushed down from the mountain. From the looks of it, it seemed like it wanted to destroy Gudatsi and the others in one blow. That's an Abifu's spirit. Gudatsi was shocked. It was clearly a large magical beast. After Mount Abifu was killed by the former Ishtar, a magical beast was naturally formed in the mountain. The magical beast represents the anger of Mount Abifu, so it's called the Abifu spirit. However, everyone had no time to listen to Wuming's explanation. At this moment, whether it was the current speed of the magical pig or the position of everyone, it clearly pointed out the situation they were in at the moment. It's a big crisis. Although his words were full of panic, Matthew immediately put up his shield in front of everyone. Master! Matthew glanced at Gudatsi, and Gudatsi nodded knowingly. At this time, it was obviously unrealistic to escape, so Matthew was ready to activate his noble phantasm to resist the impact of the magical pig. Gudatsi was also ready to support him with her command spell, just in case. At this time, Wuming suddenly walked to Matthew, who had already put up his shield, put his hand on Matthew's shoulder, and said, Let me do it, Senior Villo. Matthew could not make up his mind for a while and turned to look at his senior. Gudatsi nodded. Since Wuming said so, she believed in him. Senior Villo, please be careful. Matthew did not withdraw his shield. After talking to Wuming, he returned to Gudatsi's side. Even with the protection of Senior Villo, he can't relax. He still has to protect his senior. Assassin, how are you going to deal with it? Gudatsi looked at the magical pig that was getting closer and closer and looked at Wuming with a little panic. Tachika, do you know that I'm partly responsible for the reason why Mount Abifu was killed by Ishtar? As if reflecting this sentence, when a bifling saw Wu Ming standing at the front, it became even angrier and even sped up a little. You're also partly responsible? Gadatsi was stunned. You can say that I didn't save him. Without further explanation, Wu Ming looked at a bifling, who was getting angrier, and stretched out his hand. Wu Ming has long known that Mount Abifu will be killed by Ishtar through his understanding of the mysterious world. Therefore, Wu Ming did not intervene too much in this matter. When he came to the land of Mesopotamia, he had several conversations with the mountain spirit of Mount Abifu. When he brought Gil to Mount Abifu also gave Wu Ming a lot of convenience. It was precisely because of his good impression that Wu Ming helped Mount Abifu and sent Ishtar away to avoid Mount Abifu's death. However, when the Ishtar in the parallel world learned about Gilgamesh's gender, her anger affected Mount Abifu, and Wu Ming's inaction was also a factor. Although that happened in the parallel world, it will be similar in this world. What happened in the parallel world where Wu Ming is in, other parallel worlds will definitely be affected to a certain extent. Wu Ming knows in his heart that the suppression force of the M-shaped moon world will definitely do this. Therefore, when facing the angry Abifu in this parallel world, Wu Ming had a strange feeling. He and the mountain spirit of Mount Abifu are not very close friends, but they are still friends. Wu Ming still has a trace of regret for his inaction in the beginning. This is also one of the few regrets of Wu Ming in the continuous travel that continues to this day. The appearance of the Abifu spirit is probably related to my voice just now. Since I'm the one who lured it out, then I'll clean it up. Wu Ming doesn't know whether the killing of Ishtar in this parallel world by the Abifu mountain has direct or indirect relationship with him. But Wu Ming can be sure of one thing. At this moment, the Abifu spirit in front of Wu Ming has become an existence like a violent spirit, and the only thing Wu Ming can do is to give it relief. Thinking of this, Wu Ming condensed a large amount of magic power in his hand. The powerful magic power caused the air to flow rapidly, thus creating wind. Moreover, the extremely dense magic power source in Wu Ming's hand also produced some gravitational force, slowly attracting the surrounding stones and soil. Seeing this, Merlin's expression changed. Merlin is not interested in anything else but the move Wu Ming is about to use. This magic power. Roman and Chaldea also saw the data result from the detection instrument and made a shocked sound. Could it be? Immediately afterward, the magic power source in Wu Ming's hand that had reached the limit of density suddenly compressed. In an instant, a high-intensity hurricane spread from Wu Ming's palm to the surroundings, blowing Merlin's clothes. Gadatsi and Matthew were also unable to open their eyes because of the strong wind pressure. In the next second, a beam of light full of magic power and the size of a huge wild boar that was the incarnation of the Abifu spirit instantly shot towards the Abifu spirit that rushed in front of Wu Ming. The Abifu spirit was swallowed by the beam of light without any preparation and without any sound. Then, the beam of light burst into the sky with the movement of Wu Ming's arm. The beam of light disappeared, the wind pressure disappeared, and Gadatsi and Matthew also opened their eyes. The Abifu spirit had already disappeared, leaving only a charred trace that rushed along the ground to the mountain. Walala, extremely fine sand, stones, and soil fell from the sky, which was the debris attracted by the gravity generated by the magic power source. Wait a minute. Was that just a simple magic cannon? Roman's shocked voice came out from Gadatsi's wrist again. Magic cannon? Gadatsi asked in confusion. It's a magic trick where pure magic is processed, transformed, and strengthened to shoot at the enemy in the form of bullets or cannonballs. It's called magic bullet, and magic cannon can be understood as a luxurious upgraded version of magic bullet. Whether it's strength or range, it's improved by more than a little. Merlin kindly explained. The upgraded version of magic bullets, Assassin, is really powerful. I've only just learned how to release ordinary magic bullets after a long time of practice. Gadatsi scratched the back of her head embarrassedly. You can't compare with him. Magic cannon has high requirements in fine operation and magic power. The former is fine, but almost no human can meet the latter. Chapter 9:13. Magicians were magicians because they were a group of people who studied magic. It was naturally possible to achieve the former, but the latter was really difficult for magicians. For example, the magic power of the magic cannon that Wu Ming had just released was almost comparable to the magic power of a large spiritual vein. If ordinary magicians wanted to release such a magic cannon, they would not be able to do it without using some extremely special methods. Senior Villow's magic power is indeed quite sufficient. Matthew remembered that when they were at the American Singularity, Wu Ming created a fake Holy Grail that simply provided magic power for Wu Ming. Wu Ming's magic power was not infinite, but he did not lack magic power. There was no other reason. His magic power capacity was really beyond imagination. If Wu Ming's body was used as the source of the world, Wu Ming, who had sufficient magic power, would not have the slightest pressure to support the magic operation of a world. Not only was the amount great, but Wu Ming's magic power recovery was also extraordinary. However, at this time, Roman shouted, "Wait a minute, you're focusing on the wrong thing." The shout was as if he had seen something incredible. My equipment here shows that Hyunryong did not use a magic cannon, but a pure magic blast that looks like a magic cannon. Roman's words focused everyone's attention on Gadatsi's communication bracelet. "Doctor, what do you mean? It did not go through the processing, deformation, and strengthening of the general magic bullet process. He directly compressed the magic power to the extreme and simply released it." Gadatsi and Matthew looked at each other, and then at Wu Ming at the same time. The three of them looked at each other without saying a word, but Wu Ming could clearly see that Gadatsi and Matthew's mouths were slowly opening wide. Hey. Merlin, who had already expected this, covered his ears in advance to prevent his ears from suffering. Although I have never seen Villow's magic power before. Merlin smiled rather relaxedly. But to be able to burn the ground like this, how much magic power must be compressed and released? Matthew had some experience in magic, unlike Gadatsi, who was a newcomer. Anyway, in Matthew's eyes, it was simply compressed magic power and released it. Without magic modification, it would not be able to create such a scene. Although many servants had the skill mana release, they could not create such a scene that looked like it was bombarded by a supergiant electromagnetic cannon. Mana release was a skill that allowed the user to release the mana stored in their body for a split second. It was a good choice for both damage and movement speed. Moreover, some servants also had obvious magic attributes. In that case, mana release could achieve different effects. For example, take Karna as an example. As a servant, the attribute of his skill mana release was flame. By releasing a large amount of magic power from the soles of his feet in an instant, the flame produced by the magic power could promote Karna to rise, thus achieving the effect of flight. By controlling the magic power intermittently, it could achieve the effect of hovering in the air. That was the advantage of mana release with obvious attributes. Although the ordinary mana release could also achieve this point, the ordinary mana release was indeed not as good as the mana release with the flame attribute. And Wu Ming's magic power did not have any attributes. It was just pure magic power. However, whether it was magic power with or without attributes, it was extremely difficult to create such a scene in front of Gadatsi and others. Mana release, with such a large range, required magic power that not everyone could have. In short, ordinary people and even servants did not have enough magic power. Almost no servant had as much magic power as Wu Ming, and even the energy in the god's body could not catch up with Wu Ming. And what was the advantage of having more magic power? It was the unlimited use of magic power, from quantitative change to qualitative change. Only quantitative change can lead to qualitative change, which was understood by everyone, but not everyone could do it. After all, no one could squander their magic power like Wu Ming. The magic power compressed by Wu Ming even produced a trace of gravity, which was enough to imagine how huge the base of the magic power compressed by Wooming was. It can be said that if Villo didn't artificially raise the magic power after the compression, I'm afraid half of Abyss Mountain would have been impacted and exploded. Roman made the final statement. I'm going to drink some coffee to relieve my shocked heart. See you later. However, Wooming did not think that drinking coffee would have an effect on relieving heart fatigue. After that, Roman closed the communication channel. Matthew saw that Roman's voice no longer came out of the communication bracelet, so he raised his head and looked at Wooming. Matthew swallowed his saliva to show that he still hadn't recovered from the shock just now. Gadotsi was not affected much. By the way, assassin, what will happen if you blow yourself up? Gadotsi suddenly asked a question, which also attracted Matthew's attention. The explosion will probably affect the range between here and the Uruk. Abyss Mountain was still some distance away from the Uruk, which was indeed terrifying. At this moment, Wooming's bad taste broke out. Why, do you want me to try? Wooming looked at Gadotsi with a smile on his face. If it's your request, Tachika, it's not that I can't do it. I'll be happy to try it for you. Let's not. Let's go up the mountain. Goddess Ishtar is probably tired of waiting for us. Gadotsi immediately waved her hand, but the trace of sweat on her forehead still showed a trace of panic in the girl's heart. You're right. We pretended to think for a moment, then turned around and continued climbing the mountain. When we passed by the scorch marks on the mountain, Gadotsi and Matthew couldn't help but take a few more glances. If they were hit by this cannon, it would indeed be terrifying. The two thought of the angry Ibif spirit. It was really pitiful, then the two rejoiced. Fortunately, when they fired the magic cannon just now, they didn't aim it at the mountain. Otherwise, I'm sorry, Tachika, Matthew, the mountain path opposite us is broken in half, and we can't use it. Wooming, who was walking in front, suddenly said. Maybe it was affected by the magic cannon. Anyway, we can't use it for a while. Okay, let's pretend that they didn't say anything. Wooming looked at Gadotsi and Matthew, then looked at Merlin and made a decision in his heart that made Merlin feel a little uneasy. A moment later, Wooming carried Gadotsi and Matthew to the top of the mountain. Is this Goddess Ishtar's palace? The first thing that came into Matthew's sight was a building that was different from the surrounding barren land. It flashed with a hint of gold. But it's just a little. Gadotsi smiled awkwardly. What was Gadotsi laughing about? It was none other than Gadotsi laughing at the two large manekiniko in front of the entrance of Ishtar's palace. Chapter 9:14. Wooming naturally also noticed the large manekiniko in front of Ishtar's palace. Although it looked funny, it was not as simple as it looked. However, Wooming did not think that it was from Ishtar's memory. After all, there was no such thing as a manekiniko in Mesopotamia before BC. It was probably the knowledge brought by the girl that Ishtar relied on. After all, the girl lived in the 21st century. By the way, Merlin hasn't come up yet? Wooming did not see Merlin for a long time and could not help but ask. This? Gadotsi and Matthew looked at each other. They did not know what to say. At this time, a weak voice came into Wooming's ears. Damn it, Vero, you bastard. How dare you make me climb up the cliff by myself? At a certain cliff, a hand so white that it didn't look like a human suddenly reached out and grabbed the ground. Then, a staff was stretched out by the person's other hand and pierced into the ground to complete the fixation. Finally, the white-haired Big Brother Dream Demon appeared in front of Wu Ming and the others, looking exhausted. I can't bring 3 people with me, so I have to trouble you. You are also a servant, Merlin. You can't let Tachika and the others climb up here. Wooming comforted Merlin with both reason and emotion. But Matthew is also a servant. However, as soon as Merlin finished this sentence, Wooming stared at him. It was as if he was saying, I'm a girl, are you? Let's go. Maybe Ishtar will escape if we stay here for a long time. After Wooming finished, he did not care about Merlin. Gadotsi and Matthew, who wanted to say a few good words for Merlin, went straight to the gate of the temple. It's really unfair. Merlin shrugged his shoulders and complained. He immediately followed Wooming. In fact, Merlin was not as weak as he had imagined. Previously, Merlin had leaped and sprinted through the mountains to find Wooming. This was enough to show how good Merlin's stamina was. Moreover, part of Artoria's swordsmanship was taught by Merlin. Even if such a person claimed to be a magician, who would believe it? By the way, Wooming also learned swordsmanship from Merlin with Artoria, but because the effect was not obvious, it was better to use the spear skills taught by his master, Scar, so he did not learn much. Walking past the Manekiniko, Wooming thought that the Manekiniko could move, but kept its Manekiniko posture and did not move at all. This dispelled Wooming's idea that the two Manekiniko were gatekeepers. The four continued to go deeper. Because Ishtar's palace was built on the mountain, some parts of the interior were full of darkness. Not only that, the internal structure and the external appearance looked very different. There was no gorgeous look at all. Is this really the palace of the goddess Ishtar? Gadotsi could not help but ask. Obviously, the palace looked so gorgeous from the outside, but the inside was quite disappointing. Because Ishtar has no money. Wooming simply said the truth. This is simple and easy to understand. Tachika, you just need to remember that Ishtar is a loser goddess who loves money and gems, but has no fate with these things. Okay. Gadotsi nodded a little at a loss. After walking for a little while, Matthew saw flashing lights in front of them. Are those torches? It was the light of burning torches. The walls on both sides of the road were inlaid with burning torches, which made the passage look a little more majestic. However, it was only a sliver of... It's almost there. Although Wooming had not been here before, Wooming could feel the divinity of Ishtar. So, their destination was almost there, the main palace where Ishtar lived. Sure enough, after walking through the corridor inlaid with burning torches, the four of them entered a room that looked like a hall. In the middle of the hall, there was a stone pedestal that looked like a throne. Under the stone pedestal were stones that had been trimmed. The stones increased the height of the stone pedestal, which seemed to be deliberately designed. If one wanted to look at the person sitting on the stone pedestal, one had to look up and let the person on the stone pedestal look down on them. It had to be said that this was the work of the gods to make the visitors worship them. Directly above the stone pedestal, there was a big hole in the middle of the ceiling of the main hall. Although it was artificially repaired, it could still be seen that it was violently damaged. Sunlight shone through the big hole like a skylight into the palace, making the originally rather shabby palace look high-end and classy. And the stone pedestal happened to be completely illuminated by the sunlight. Whether it was morning or evening, as long as there was sunlight, the stone pedestal would be illuminated. This design was quite satisfactory. It seems that Ishtar's brain is not as bad as I thought. Wooming looked at the scene and nodded in praise. Of course, who do you think I am? A charming voice came from the shadow of the palace. Then, a beautiful goddess slowly walked out of the shadow and came into everyone's sight. This person was Ishtar, who ran away after being angered by Wooming. I am Ishtar, the mistress of the heavens. This is my palace, Ishtar, so of course I have to be more careful. As Ishtar said, she gently jumped directly onto the stone pedestal and crossed her legs, looking down at Wooming and others below. Goddess Ishtar, your posture is really good. The innocent Matthew couldn't help but complain. He had to admit that this posture was indeed very annoying. Ishtar adhered to her usual style. Even in the state of pseudo-servant, the material on her clothes was still very little. And Ishtar, who was sitting on the raised throne with her legs crossed, in front of Wooming and others, was already in a state of naked state in the future. However, among the four people present, Gadotsi was a woman, and Merlin was a nightmare who didn't understand human feelings. Neither of them would be moved by Ishtar. Only Matthew was too innocent to remind Ishtar. As for Wooming, he was completely used to it. Don't worry about this girl. She didn't care about her clothes at all since a long time ago. It was precisely because the previous Ishtar was extremely thin every day, coupled with Ishtar's bad character that caused Wooming to have no interest in Ishtar at all. After all, he would get tired of seeing too much. The original Ishtar didn't have the slightest interest in Wooming, let alone the human girl Ishtar. The pseudo-servant state of Ishtar was really far from the original Ishtar in terms of beauty. More importantly, the human girl that Ishtar relied on was someone that Wuming knew. Chapter 9:15. The Mentor who once accidentally led Ilya onto the path of a magical girl, Rin in Osaka. Ishtar's face was exactly the same as Rin in Osaka's face, and similarly, Ishtar also retained Rin in Osaka's slightly regrettable breasts, just slightly. But to Wu Ming's surprise, after Ma Shu reminded him, Ishtar showed a hint of shyness and embarrassment. He didn't know if it was because of the existence in Ishtar's body, but after Ma Shu reminded him, Ishtar showed a shy and embarrassed look. Shocked, Ishtar actually blushed out of shyness? But seemingly noticing Wu Ming's surprise, Ishtar's face suddenly changed, and her slightly red cheeks instantly became normal. In the next second, Tianzhou's horse Anna flew in through the big hole in the ceiling. Ishtar jumped slightly and sat directly on horse Anna, and let horse Anna rise into the air and stay away from Wu Ming. It could be considered as indirectly preventing her from being exposed. However, Wu Ming didn't give Ishtar any face. When Ishtar sat on horse Anna and moved, Wu Ming directly said the truth of his guess. By the way, were you hiding over there just now? Sigh. Wait, no, why would I hide over there? Although Ishtar seemed a little flustered, she immediately pretended to be calm. I thought you didn't dare to see me. In that case, let's get straight to the point. Wu Ming no longer held back with Ishtar. Come back to Uruk with us, mistress of the heavens Ishtar. The Uruk needs the power of your goddess. Wu Ming stretched out his right hand to Ishtar, who was flying high in the sky and bathed in the sun, and very simply and violently pulled her to his side. This made Gadotsi, Matthew, and even Merlin dumbfounded. Even Roman and Leonardo da Vinci, who were monitoring in Chaldea, were taken aback by Wu Ming's sudden invitation. Vilo Senpai, Goddess Ishtar wouldn't agree. In the end, Matthew raised a question. Both sides were clearly standing on opposite sides. So why did Wu Ming still ask such a question that would definitely be rejected? Not only Matthew, but Gadotsi also didn't understand. Why wouldn't she agree? Ishtar never said that she wouldn't return to Uruk with us. Everyone was stunned. Carefully recalling Ishtar's words, it seemed that it was indeed as Wu Ming said. Ishtar never said that she wouldn't return to Uruk. She only said that she wouldn't sign a temporary contract with Gadotsi. Ishtar, who was also stunned by Wu Ming's sudden invitation, also recovered at this moment. Ishtar was also surprised by Wu Ming's approach, but after carefully recalling, she really didn't say that she wouldn't return to Uruk. In other words, there was still a chance for things to turn around? Yes, Ishtar was a little happy, but she couldn't help it because Wu Ming was here. Ishtar was indeed hiding just now. She knew that if there were only a few people in Chaldea, Ishtar wouldn't have to care about their expressions at all and could do whatever she wanted. However, Wu Ming just had to come with her. When she returned to her palace, she heard a loud noise and felt a strong magic power. It was undoubtedly Wu Ming's magic power, and Ishtar always felt that Wu Ming was stronger than before. Ishtar knew that she couldn't beat Wu Ming. Without her father's protection, Ishtar would definitely be hung up and beaten by Wu Ming. In the end, she would be shipped back to Uruk and forced to sign a contract with that human girl. Even worse, Ishtar would be forced to become Gold Twinkle's subordinate and act according to his orders. This was something she didn't want to encounter in any case. However, she couldn't compromise just like that. Sign a contract with a human master and then go back to work for Gold Twinkle? What a joke. And for some reason, Ishtar felt like she couldn't raise her head in front of Wu Ming. Just like most human beings, like a child meeting their parents or a student meeting their teacher, Ishtar realized that she had a natural fear of Wu Ming for some reason. That was why when she faced Wu Ming before, no matter how angry she was, Wu Ming lectured her, or when she saw Wu Ming get angry, she was like a deflated balloon. She could only blame it on the aftereffects of being bullied by Wu Ming in the past. That was why Ishtar was thinking when she hid. If she couldn't do it, she would just run away. It had to be said that Wu Ming guessed Ishtar's thoughts. It felt like the person who knows you best is not your friend, but your enemy. Wuming was afraid that if they spent too much time on the road, Ishtar would run away after letting her imagination run wild. So Wuming directly flew up with Gadotsi and the others. Anyway, it wasn't like Ishtar hadn't done this kind of thing before, and for her, it wasn't something to be embarrassed about. From the looks of it, it was also because Wuming and the others came a little too quickly that Ishtar didn't have time to run away. She had no choice but to face them with force. Ishtar, I could take a step back. You don't have to sign a contract with our master, and you don't have to be Gil's servant. You only have to cooperate with us to deal with the monsters. This is already the greatest respect we can give to you as a goddess. Since Ishtar refused to sign a temporary contract, Wuming would just cancel this condition. As for the content of the second condition, it was even easier to understand. We have already made a big concession. I hope you can consider it. After Wuming finished speaking, he didn't say anything else. This made Ishtar a little surprised that Wuming would actually give in. According to Ishtar's understanding of Wuming, in this kind of situation where the gods disappeared and she did something slightly out of line, Wuming should directly attack her. She really couldn't beat Wuming, and there was no other way except to run away. However, according to Ishtar's understanding, before Wuming and the others came, she could still run away. But now, she probably couldn't run away. It was because she couldn't run away that Ishtar forced herself to meet Wuming and the others. However, Ishtar didn't expect that Wuming would actually choose to take a step back and discuss with her. This made Ishtar, who was originally a little nervous, feel a little proud. It was really just a little and a little. I didn't expect that one day, Hyunryong, Sama would also bow to me, very good, very good. As Ishtar spoke, her face revealed a smile that she thought was perfect. However, this smile in front of Gadotsi and the others was like a blooming flower. Then what do you think? Ta, air. Wuming's entire face darkened, only his red eyes emitting a deeper red light. He had, indeed, taken a step back, but when he saw Ishtar's complacent look, he was still displeased. Ishtar was shocked by Wuming's expression, but at the same time, she understood one thing. Wuming's concession wasn't a compromise. It was just giving her face or giving her a choice. It wasn't giving her a chance to take a yard after taking an inch. Chapter 9:16. Well, since you are begging me, I can't consider it. Although Ishtar's tone was quite weak when she said this. I originally wanted to use force against you, but for some reason, I gave up on this idea. Then, Wuming looked back at Merlin. That one is here. As soon as Wuming spoke, Merlin knew what Wuming was talking about. Indeed, they have arrived. Merlin nodded. Then, Merlin turned and walked toward the passage behind him. I will go and block them for a while. You guys discuss as soon as possible. As Merlin spoke, his figure disappeared. Assassin, where did Merlin go? After watching Merlin leave, Gadotsi immediately looked at Wuming. I will keep you in suspense. Wuming smiled at Gadotsi, then looked back at Ishtar flying in the sky. One last thing, I will fight for 1/10 of the treasures in Gil's treasure vault for you as a reward. 1/10. Ishtar was surprised, but the corners of her mouth subconsciously curled up. It was a surprise that came from the bottom of her heart. King Gilgamesh's treasure? Matthew couldn't help but repeat. Gilgamesh is the great king who collected all the treasures in the world. Even 1/10 of the treasures in the treasure vault is priceless. The goddess of beauty, harvest, and battle, mistress of the heavens Ishtar. You don't have to listen to the orders of Chaldea's master Tachika or the Uruk King Gilgamesh. You only need to listen to my instructions and fight the monsters with us. I will also fight for 1/10 of the treasures in King Gilgamesh's treasure vault for you as a reward. How about it? Can you accept it? Wuming's voice was like magic as it entered Ishtar's ears like a bell. No problem. I accept. Ishtar looked proud as if she had earned a lot. In fact, when Wuming proposed to work together, Ishtar was hesitant to agree. Who would have thought that Wuming would ask for 1/10 of the treasures in Gilgamesh's treasure vault as a reward? This was something that Ishtar didn't expect. If she didn't agree now, what if Wuming went back on his word later? That was 1/10 of the treasures. It was more than enough to renovate this dilapidated temple. Hee. Ishtar, who was flying in the air, giggled as she fantasized about the treasures in her hands. She didn't notice the parchment in Wuming's hand, nor did she notice that there were 3 red marks on the back of Wuming's hand that looked like a bow and wings. 1 left wing, 1 right wing, and 1 arrow sandwiched between the left wing and the right wing. This was the pattern on the back of Wuming's hand. Then, the contract has been established. Looking at the contents of the parchment, Wuming showed a triumphant smile. Ishtar, yes. However, Ishtar, who subconsciously answered Wuming, was stunned. What's going on? Ishtar found that she couldn't control herself and answered Wuming's words, and her body seemed to be affected as well. She couldn't move like a machine waiting for orders. No matter how stupid Ishtar was, she realized that something was wrong at this moment. Coincidentally, Ishtar saw the command seal flashing with scarlet light on the back of Wuming's hand. That's command seal. How is that possible? Let's not talk about how she became his servant. She clearly had an A-level magic pair. Ishtar's mind was in a mess. Ishtar's A-level magic pair didn't have any effect on Ishtar's magic, and it didn't help her resist the command at all. Ishtar helped Merlin destroy the attacking demonic beasts. Remember, even if you let the demonic beasts escape, you can't let the demonic beast commander escape. You're allowed to use your noble phantoms. Go. The left wing of the command seal on Wuming's hand glowed. At the same time, Ishtar felt that there was an unimaginable amount of magic in her body. Yes, Ishtar was forced to answer, and she flew out of the big hole in the ceiling with Sky Boat Horse Anna. Damn Hyunryong. Just you wait. Ishtar was obviously crying in the end. In the end, Ishtar was bullied by Wuming and cried. That stupid goddess is still so easy to deal with. Wuming looked at the command seal on the back of his hand, and he was in a good mood. That, Villo Sr., Matthew was at a loss, and Gadotsi was even more serious. She was shocked. Assassin, what the hell is going on? This sentence contained a lot of questions. For example, why did Wuming have a command seal? Why did Ishtar suddenly sign a master-slave contract with Wuming? Why didn't Ishtar have the slightest ability to resist? One of my powers is to sign a contract with others. I used a word game to successfully make Ishtar sign a contract with me. Wuming's power was one of the 12 incarnations, the dependent incarnation, which had the ability to sign a contract with others and make them his dependent. Although the parchment was similar to the organizer's authority, it was only similar. It was not the organizer's authority, but the proof of Wuming's dependent contract. The organizer's authority could only be used in the world of the box court, and it would lose its effectiveness after leaving the box court. And if it could be used outside the box court, wouldn't it be invincible? As for this, Wuming raised his hand and showed the remaining 2 command seals to Gadotsi and Matthew. This is just a simple magic crystal, not a command seal. Wuming's command and restraint on Ishtar were the influence of the dependent incarnation, not the contract between the master and the servant. The dependent contract was deeply ingrained in one's bones, so Ishtar's magic power would not work at all, even if her magic power was X. The magic crystal was like the house's anti-theft system, and the command seal was like the thief's theft method. The anti-theft system could naturally play a certain role in the thief's theft method. However, the contract between Wuming and Ishtar was the product of Ishtar's consent. It was like Wuming got the key to the house from Ishtar. With the key, Wuming could naturally bypass the anti-theft system and enter Ishtar's house. Ishtar, who signed a word game contract with Wuming, would be directly under Wuming's control and would not have any effect on magic at all. And these 3 command seal marks were just the magic crystals that Wuming used to support Ishtar. It could be said that they had nothing to do with the command seal. And Wuming used such a magic crystal only because Wuming wanted Ishtar to directly use the noble phantasm when her magic was saturated. Boom! Chapter 9:17. The violent explosion shook the entire Abyss Mountain. Bits of stone fell from Ishtar's palace onto Wooming, Gadotsi, and Matthew. What was that sound? Gadotsi and Matthew both looked in the direction of the explosion. It's probably Ishtar releasing her noble phantasm. Through the contract, Wooming could feel the rapid depletion of the mana in Ishtar's body. He guessed that Ishtar had most likely released her noble phantasm. By the way, Senior Villo, how did you know that the demonic beasts would appear here? Matthew was quite puzzled. This was an area with continuous mountains. The demonic beasts would not be able to advance from here. I captured one of the demonic beast commanders, Yelidam. Merlin used an illusion to obtain information from Yelidam's mind. We learned that the demonic beasts would advance from the mountainous areas in the southwest, near the Persian Gulf, and the mountainous areas in the northeast. Then, Wooming told the two of them his plan. The reason why Wooming brought Gadotsi and Matthew here to look for Ishtar was not only to recruit Ishtar, but also one of the reasons why Wooming came here. He had already killed the demonic beast commander, Yelidam, who was preparing to attack from the mountainous areas in the southwest. In addition, there was the Quetzalcoatl in the south. As for the southwest, Wooming could relax, but there was no one in the mountainous areas in the northeast. So, Wooming thought of Ishtar, who was still a lone follower. Not only could he get Ishtar to join them, but he could also deal with the demonic beasts that were advancing from here. It was simply killing two birds with one stone. The reason why Wooming changed his mind about using force against Ishtar was entirely because Wooming's mental strength had detected a large number of demonic beasts approaching. The reason why Merlin gave Wooming the confirmation of the demonic beast's arrival was that Merlin had already set up a magic spell nearby to detect the demonic beast's attack. When did he set it up? Of course, it was when Wooming brought Gadotsi and Matthew straight to Ishtar's palace. The reason why he did not bring Merlin was partly because Wooming could not bring 3 people with him. Another reason was to let Merlin set up a detection spell. Although Merlin often complained that he would bite his tongue while chanting spells, he was still a magician after all. Naturally, he could do that. Due to the unexpected arrival of the magical beasts and the fact that Ishtar's matter had not been settled yet, Merlin decided to use his hallucinating spell to stop the magical beasts for now. Therefore, after Wooming tricked Ishtar into signing the contract, Wooming immediately sent Ishtar to support Merlin. The reason why he used a magical crystal on Ishtar was so that Ishtar could use her noble phantasm directly. Because Ishtar had killed the Biff Mountain, there was no sign of life at all. There was no need to consider whether it would affect the innocent. Ishtar could use her noble phantasm without any worries. Moreover, even if she could not kill the demonic beast commander, the other mass-produced demonic beasts would definitely be killed. At this time, if they went to support the demonic beast commander, it would most likely be the death anniversary of the demonic beast commander next year. Let's go to Chica, Matthew. It's time to deal with the demonic beast commander. Although the entire northeastern region of Mesopotamia was full of mountains, it was rare that there was a small barren plain between the mountains and the northern wall. There were no obstacles in the south of this small plain, and it could directly connect to the Uruk. However, because there were mountains in the east, north, and west of this plain, it was not included in the range of the northern wall. The northern wall was close to the mountains in the west of this plain. Logically speaking, there was no need to worry about the mountains. After all, demonic beasts could not cross the mountains. However, since the demonic beast commander's raid on the Uruk, Gilgamesh set up a defensive barrier nearby. After all, no one knew if the demonic beast commander had more methods that humans had not seen before. Although the strength of the temporarily designed barrier could not be compared to the northern wall, it was only used to delay time after all. This was a plan. If demonic beasts really crossed the mountains and came here, the soldiers on the defensive wall would be able to see it at a glance. Then, the barrier here would temporarily block the demonic beasts while the soldiers lined up to report to the Uruk. Because this place was not far from the Uruk, it was convenient for them to inform the soldiers or send more soldiers. However, there had never been any traces of demonic beasts here. Perhaps the demonic beasts were really blocked by the mountains. But even so, Gilgamesh would not be careless. It was because of his carelessness against the demonic beast commander that the Uruk was ambushed from the underground that night, and 1/3 of the population was killed or injured. Once a large number of demonic beasts appeared here, the situation would definitely be terrible. After all, this place was very close to the Uruk. If the demonic beasts broke through here, the entire Mesopotamia might be doomed. After all, the demonic beasts that gathered together were not terrible. The terrible thing was that the demonic beasts that broke and would spread out and slaughter the human beings on the land behind the northern wall. Therefore, to be on the safe side, Gilgamesh also sent 2 servants who survived the last beheading operation to this place. On the temporary wall of the defensive wall, a girl wearing a rather revealing ancient Japanese-style armor walked up. A katana was hanging horizontally on her waist, and her long hair was tied into a knot on the left side to form a bun hairstyle. After that, her left ponytail fell to her waist. She looked quite handsome. This person was one of the 2 surviving servants, Ryder. Her real name was Nuwakamaru. As usual, she needed to check the situation of the soldiers and see if there were any demonic beasts attacking. Nuwakamaru, Sama, you came to inspect again. The soldiers were accustomed to it. They were quite respectful to the strong person who was summoned by King Gilgamesh. The young girl was agile and strong in martial arts. She was also kind and treated the soldiers equally. Thus, she was deeply respected by the soldiers. Demonic beasts won't come to the mountains, and we are here. You can rest assured. A soldier patted his chest and vowed. Several soldiers next to him also nodded in agreement. In this regard, Nuwakamaru smiled and shook her head. The defeated general only wants to complete the king's order to make up for his mistakes. Naturally, he should take it seriously. Nuwakamaru, Sama's words are very true. However, everything is this poor monk's fault. Everything is this poor monk's fault. This poor monk should be punished twice. A monk with a large number of weapons on his back and a katana in his hand followed behind Nuwakamaru. This person was one of the 2 surviving servants, Lancer. His real name was Musasobo Benkei. Chapter 9:18. Don't say that, Bianqing. No matter what, you saved my life. Nyoruowan closed his eyes. It was as if he was recalling the last moment of the operation to decapitate the commander-in-chief. At that time, 10 servants carried out the beheading operation. The reason why Nuwakamaru and Musasobo Benkei survived was entirely because Musasobo Benkei, who was Nuwakamaru's minister, saved Nuwakamaru from being killed by the beasts. Musasobo Benkei pulled Nuwakamaru into the Euphrates River. However, there were also mass-produced beasts in the river, the winged mermaid Kuru. Musasobo Benkei and Nuwakamaru were almost killed by the winged mermaids. Fortunately, Musasobo Benkei activated his noble phantasm in time and temporarily affected the spirit of the winged mermaids. Musasobo Benkei and Nuwakamaru were able to escape, but both of them were seriously injured. It could only be said that it was fate. Although both of them were seriously injured, they were lucky not to die. By coincidence, both of them drifted to the North Wall. Both the Euphrates River and the Tigris River flowed through the North Wall. In the past, the Uruk did not defend these 2 rivers, causing a large number of winged mermaids to appear from the river and cause damage to the surrounding area. After that, according to Gilgamesh's plan, people set up a similar gate at the position of the 2 rivers passing through the North Wall. The effect of the gate was simple. Beasts couldn't swim through, and the river flowed normally. Since demonic beasts couldn't swim past the barrier, the servants naturally couldn't swim past it. Nyoru and Musashi Benkei were blocked outside the barrier. They happened to be discovered by the daily maintenance inspection personnel and were rescued. They were the only 2 servants who returned to Uruk alive. If Musasobo Benkei didn't pull Nuwakamaru into the river at that time, perhaps both of them would be buried in different groups of beasts like the other 8 servants who participated in the beheading operation. No, Lord Nyoru, Chiaching of Musashigeru, seemed to have something else he wanted to hide as he stammered. However, before Musasobo Benkei finished hesitating, on the wall of the stronghold, A soldier with sharp eyes suddenly saw a large cloud of dust on the plain in front of them. "What's that?" Many of the soldiers climbed to the top of the stronghold's walls to take a look. Even Yoruowaru did not listen to the hesitant words of Takashige. Instead, he jumped onto the battlements of the tower and squatted down. Because of his clothes, Nyoruowaru's seductive figure looked in the direction where the soldiers were looking. Nawakamaru, whose eyesight was much better than many soldiers, instantly saw what was coming toward them along with the dust. "That's beasts." Thousands or even more red-furred, lion-like magical beasts were mixed in the smoke and dust, charging towards them like a flash flood. It was a rather impactful sight. "It's the mass-produced Yugur." Nawakamaru's eyes sharpened, and he instantly felt that something was wrong. He could only say that it was all thanks to King Gilgamesh and military advisor Zhuge's foresight. They had predicted that there would be beasts coming from here and set up the stronghold in advance. Otherwise, with so many beasts rushing over without any defensive facilities, this place would definitely become the beast attack point, and they would destroy the entire Mesopotamia. Di Qing immediately returned to the Uruk and report the situation here to King Gilgamesh and asked for backup. Nawakamaru immediately jumped down from the high platform and went to Musasobo Benkei. Yes, Sir Nawakamaru." Although Musasobo Benkei was a little hesitant, he immediately agreed. As for the reason why Nawakamaru did not let the soldiers report to the Uruk, but let Musasobo Benkei do it, it was entirely because the strength of the servants was much stronger than the human soldiers. This was indeed the gods' era, and the humans here were indeed much stronger than the modern humans. Their physical fitness was obviously different, but the servants were still stronger than the humans here. Therefore, it was the best choice to let one servant go to the Uruk to report, and the other servant to command the soldiers to resist the beasts. Gilgamesh let Nawakamaru and Musasobo Benkei come together to guard this place. Although one less servant may lead to a decrease in combat power, it was better to be able to bring reinforcements faster than anything else. This was a war between humans and beasts, and the overall situation must be taken into account. Musasobo Benkei immediately set off. He did not need anything like a mount. The legs of a servant were the best means of transportation. Although Musasobo Benkei's dexterity was only C rank, but even a C rank's dexterity was much better than a human's. In addition, his durability had reached B+ rank. Musasobo Benkei could run all the way to the Uruk at high speed. Watching Musasobo Benkei leave, Nawakamaru also pulled out the famed sword on his waist. "Everyone prepare to defend. Let these beasts see how powerful we are." Nawakamaru was her nickname. Her real name was Minamoto Yashitsugu. She was a general of the Minamoto family. Since she was a general, it was easy for her to command the soldiers. Although there were only a few of them, the soldiers still made a deafening sound. The soldiers began to defend themselves. Some soldiers set up spears in the gaps of the walls, while others set up bows and arrows in the concave battlements on the walls. Everyone was waiting for the magic beasts to approach, ready to attack at any time. Nawakamaru held the famed sword bow LV and was ready to attack. She was ready to jump down when the beasts approached and use the Uruk as a springboard to cast her noble phantasm. Since the beasts can cross the mountain, there must be a commander commanding them from the back. Nawakamaru gathered magic in her eyes and tried to look at the back of the army of beasts that was covered by the smoke. A lion-headed man was walking upright on the plain under the cover of the smoke. Just one. Nawakamaru's mouth curved, and her face was a little twisted. Since she had found the commander of the beasts, what Nawakamaru needed to do was to take the head of the commander. Moreover, she was not afraid of just one commander. With so many beasts around her as a springboard, even if she could not kill the commander of the beasts, the original Uruk, she was confident that she would not be forced to retreat here. However, things were not as simple as Nawakamaru thought. Amidst this horde of magical beasts, Red, three-headed snakes that were as thick as small pythons appeared one after another on Wudgel's body. They were brought along by Wudgel as he charged towards the stronghold. Gradually, the entire horde of magical beasts became a horde of magical beasts mixed with lions and snakes. Chapter 919. Is that a Musu Mafu? There's so many of them. Damn it. Because the group of demonic beasts was approaching, many soldiers saw the red, three-headed snake wrapped around each Yugger. As early as 3 months ago, Gilgamesh released a notice about the types of demonic beasts, including the name, physical characteristics, degree of difficulty, number of appearance, and other information, so everyone knew the names of these demonic beasts. In an instant, it could be said that it caused a commotion. This kind of mass-produced Musu Mafu was extremely difficult to deal with, especially in this kind of offensive and defensive battle. These three-headed snakes could easily break through the human defense, through the gaps of the guns, and cause damage to the human and disrupt the human formation. Because the number of Musu Mafu was very small before, its impact was not as big as other demonic beasts. Therefore, so far, the Uruk side had not made effective defensive measures against it. They could only shrink the gap of the guns to the extent that it would not affect the guns. However, these mass-produced Musu Mafu could still get through, as if they were constantly evolving. Their size was also shrinking. The gap of the guns could not be too small, or it would affect the performance of the guns. And these Musu Mafu size at the moment just happened to be able to get through such a gap, and there were so many of them. More than one demonic beast commander. Nawakamaru could not help but sigh. Because every demonic beast had a prototype, every mass-produced demonic beast would only listen to the orders of the prototype demonic beast commander, unless the prototype demonic beast, that is, the demonic beast commander, died. Since so many mass-produced Musu Mafu appeared here, that is to say, the prototype Musu Mafu, one of the demonic beast commanders, also came here. If it was only Yugger, Nawakamaru could deal with it, and even have the opportunity to kill it. During the beheading operation, she, Mizusobo Benkei, and another servant were responsible for the demonic beast commander was the prototype Yugger. Unfortunately, the strength of the prototype Yugger was beyond their expectations, and the other servant died directly. If it were not for Mizusobo Benkei risking his life to save her, Nawakamaru would definitely die under the claws and fangs of the Yugger. Nawakamaru's mission failed. Before Nawakamaru said in front of the soldiers to make up for the mistakes, referring to the mistakes of the mission failure. Moreover, escaping death was not without any benefits. At least after the last test, Nawakamaru had figured out the strength of the demonic beast commander, prototype Yugger. Even if Yugger was a mythical beast, it was not out of the category of living creatures. So as long as the head of the prototype Yugger was cut off, the prototype Yugger would definitely die. Nawakamaru, who was holding Bo Lu, was sure that the mass-produced Yugger demonic beasts were used as a springboard to cast his noble phantasm. After being strengthened by the noble phantasm, if Bo Lu's attack hit the neck of the prototype Yugger, it would definitely be cut off. Therefore, when Nawakamaru saw that the opponent's demonic beast commander was only Yugger, he was so happy that he almost became evil. However, this time, the opponent did not have one demonic beast commander, but two. Although the prototype Musu Mafu was nowhere to be seen, the other party must be lying in ambush somewhere. Sure enough, the beheading operation made the demonic beast commanders have a sense of crisis. As a result, two demonic beast commanders are now acting together. Nawakamaru was rather melancholy as he pondered. At present, they could not retreat, and they could not block the attack. Looking at the soldiers around him who had lost their morale, Nawakamaru made a decision. Since they could not advance or retreat, they might as well cut off all means of retreat. Even if there's another demonic beast commander hiding in the dark, I'll still chop off Yugger's lion head. Nawakamaru shouted angrily and jumped down from the stronghold. She had decided to take the initiative. Master Nawakamaru. The soldiers looked at Nawakamaru's figure and could not help but worry. Retreat immediately. It's useless to stay here. Return to Uruk as soon as possible to get reinforcements. I'll hold the opponent back. Nawakamura did not even turn his head as he finished speaking and directly rushed towards the demonic beasts. The soldiers on the stronghold looked at each other. Although Nawakamura said so, they still could not make up their minds. If it was only Yugur, they could still hold on for a while. However, Yugur was entangled with Musumafu. Once Yugur brought Musumafu close to the stronghold, those Musumafu would definitely squeeze through the gaps between the weapons. There was no need to think about it. That definitely could not stop them. However, he couldn't just become a deserter and abandon Nyorowan. For a moment, the soldiers did not know what to do. However, the attentive soldiers discovered problem. Something's not right. Based on the time it took for us to see the demonic beasts should have already rushed over at this distance. The attentive soldiers raised their doubts. The soldiers began to look around and discovered that the demonic beasts had not rushed over even after a long time. There was no change in the distance at all. Ever since they discovered Musumafu, the soldiers lost their morale and did not observe the enemy situation. That was why they did not discover anything. Now that they observed again, the soldiers really did discover something different. In the middle of the plains, a white-haired man holding a magic staff appeared out of nowhere and stood there. Is that the court magician, Lord Merlin? Some of the soldiers had seen Merlin before and immediately recognized the strange-looking Merlin. Could it be that Lord Merlin is helping us? That must be it. Otherwise, why would the demonic beasts seem to be walking on the spot? It had to be said that when humans faced a crisis, there would be a moment when their minds would become emotional. However, when humans escaped from a crisis and calmed down, their minds would also become clear in an instant. Indeed, Merlin had cast an illusion spell and successfully stopped the demonic beasts. However, it could only last for a while. Nawakamo, who had rushed out, also saw Merlin's figure. However, since she had already rushed out, there was no reason for her to return. Therefore, Nawakamaru rushed to Merlin's side in one breath. Lord Merlin, why are you here? Nawakamaru was a little excited. It seemed that the Uruk's reinforcements had arrived. I just happened to pass by. The Uruk side still doesn't know the situation here. Merlin, who saw Nawakamaru's expectation, gave her a merciless blow. Are you the only one who came here? Is this too dangerous? Nawakamaru was startled. If Merlin's illusion spell was broken, then including Merlin, Nawakamaru, and many soldiers would become food for the demonic beasts. For example now, bang! The sound of glass breaking was heard. The demonic beasts began their official charge as the light purple fog dispersed. I took the initiative to break the illusion spell. Merlin explained the situation without waiting for Nawakamaru to ask. Lord Merlin. However, while Nawakamaru was surprised, Merlin immediately spoke again. Don't worry, I didn't say that I came alone. Merlin smiled and then pointed to the sky. Nawakamaru looked up subconsciously and found that a star was rising. Ngalta Kaigul He. Mountain shakes the star's salary. Chapter 920. The rising golden star was like a falling meteor, crashing straight into the center of the horde of monsters. Boom! The impact of the golden star directly penetrated the ground, as if it had been blasted by countless TNT. The rocks and soil were instantly burned into black powder by the flames, and then evaporated by the high temperature of the explosion. At the same time, countless monsters were also affected. If someone could see from the center of the explosion, they would see that the monsters were instantly vaporized by the flames and high temperature. The mass-produced Ujul was still fine. At least some of its limbs were left, such as its teeth and skull with a trace of magic power. The mass-produced Musumafu, which was much smaller than Ujul, suffered. Its entire body was engulfed by the high temperature of the explosion, and the flames had completely melted the slender bones of the mass-produced Musumafu. The huge explosion caused the ground to collapse. Although it was not as strong as Wuming's beam of light that affected the entire Mesopotamia, the entire northeastern region was still affected. The defensive barrier that was set up here shook because of the huge explosion. As it was only temporary, its quality was not very good. At this moment, it was in a state of near collapse. The soldiers had all evacuated from the barrier. If he didn't die in the process of fighting with the magical beast, but was crushed to death by the building, it would be really embarrassing. But even if they were far away from the barrier, the soldiers still found out who had released such a terrifying golden star. In Mesopotamia, when the golden star was mentioned, Ishtar would definitely be thought of. As expected, it's Lady Ishtar. Lady Ishtar, the mistress of the heavens. As expected of a goddess, she's still on our side. Long live Lady Ishtar. Oh, Ishtar, who was flying in the sky beside my Anna, heard the soldiers' cheers and praises for her. Her originally rather angry mood was now relieved. Ishtar was dissatisfied and even angry that Wuming had used his authority and word games to force a contract with her. After following Wuming's orders to come here, Ishtar's anger, along with the huge amount of magic power that Wuming had transferred to her and most of the magic power in her body, were channeled into her noble artifact. She released it with resentment towards the monsters. This made Ishtar's noble artifact even more terrifying. At the same time, Ishtar was relieving her anger from falling into Wuming's trap. However, the soldiers thought that Ishtar came to help them because she saw the monsters attacking, and they all praised Ishtar. After hearing these praises, Ishtar felt a little ashamed, but her mood completely changed into pride and joy. Although it was not his intention, Ishtar had indeed helped the humans to eliminate the demon beasts. The humans praised and cheered for Ishtar from the bottom of their hearts, which made Ishtar feel happy, which was rare for Ishtar. Even if she had been spoiled since she was young, Ishtar's nature was still good. Helping the humans, being praised, thanked, and cheered by them, naturally made Ishtar's mood very comfortable. Seems like the situation after the contract is not as bad as I thought. Ishtar was obviously referring to the contract that Wuming had tricked her with his word games. Ishtar lifted the ponytail that was fluttering in front of her chest, and then crossed her arms in front of her chest. Her face showed a hint of sadness. It's just that the magic consumption is a little high, because she was too upset. In a fit of rage, Ishtar used up almost all the magic in her body. It could be said that the current Ishtar was an empty shell. She really did not have a single bit of magic left. If there were enemies now, other than her advantage of being able to fly, she was completely a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. Looking at the end of the explosion, the ground was completely under the tower, and the ground was filled with smoke and dust. Ishtar nodded. Anyway, there's basically no such possibility. What's wrong? Are you lacking magic? Wuming, who had suddenly appeared beside Ishtar, suddenly spoke. Frightened, Ishtar hurriedly controlled the heavenly ship's horse, Anna, to retreat a distance away. When did you come over? Just now, Wuming replied very calmly, and then raised his hand again. The magic crystal on the right wing suddenly disappeared, and a large amount of magic was instantly replenished in Ishtar's body. Looking at Ishtar's dazed face, Wuming smiled. By the way, how does it feel to help a human? It feels pretty good. Although Ishtar still had a lot of resentment towards Wuming, she was already unable to be unyielding towards him. Because of Wuming, she was praised by the soldiers and received Wuming's magic. At this moment, Ishtar was even weaker than before. You can easily receive the praise of a human, and most importantly, you're very happy yourself. Why do you have to be a high and mighty and lawless goddess? Probably because of the fusion with Rin and Osaka. Compared to the original Ishtar, the current Ishtar was more reasonable, so Wuming began to reason with Ishtar. I don't want that. What I need is to be high and mighty. Humans only need to give me gems. I don't need their praise. However, these words were full of arrogance. Not only that, but Ishtar's actions were also full of arrogance. Ishtar once again crossed her arms and turned her head to the side to hide her blushing cheeks. Although the previous Ishtar was a little arrogant, now she was more influenced by Rin and Osaka's arrogance. In this regard, Wu Ming did not say anything more. Instead, he looked at her quietly. Ishtar was indeed used to being arrogant, but even the most mischievous child would want to be a good child one day. However, After being labeled as a mischievous child in the eyes of others, Ishtar couldn't be more obedient even if she wanted to. Since that was the case, she might as well continue to be a mischievous child. This was why Ishtar became more and more unruly. And today, Wuming forced Ishtar to be a good child for once, and he even let Ishtar taste the sweetness of it. This, to Ishtar, indeed was not a bad feeling. Looking at the human soldiers who were cheering for Ishtar in the distance, Ishtar extended her hand to Wuming. Okay, today I, Ishtar, will temporarily recognize you, Hyunryong. You will serve me as my temporary master. Chapter 9:21. I'm glad that you're willing to turn over a new leaf, Ishtar. Your father will be happy if he knows about this. Wu Ming reached out his hand to grab Ishtar's soft hand, but Ishtar immediately broke free and slapped Wu Ming's hand in the face. I regret it. Can I cancel the contract? Ishtar was dissatisfied with Wu Ming's tone, as if he was talking to a child. Wu Ming just smiled. It was obvious that Ishtar was being arrogant again. Come to think of it, Ishtar, your noble phantasm is really terrifying, Wu Ming said as he looked at the ground that was still collapsing. Smoke and dust rose from the ground that was penetrated. However, the food in the pot was from demonic beasts. After all, I used almost all of my mana, except for the mana, to maintain the current realm. It's natural for me to be able to create such an effect. Ishtar flipped her hair and looked quite proud. After Ishtar used the mana that Wu Ming gave her and almost all of the mana in her body, as well as the resentment in her heart, Ishtar's mood became extraordinarily good. In addition to the cheers of the soldiers and Wu Ming's kind words, Ishtar became even more arrogant. Of course, it didn't mean that Ishtar couldn't do it without Wu Ming's mana. Ishtar's noble phantasm mountain, shocking star salary, and Galta Kaigal Shi was classified as a mountain noble phantasm. It was sublimated from the deed of killing Abifshin. Although this was a plain, it was still a part of the mountain range. Therefore, the effect of the mountain noble artifact could still be used. Therefore, even without Wu Ming's mana, Ishtar only needed to supply all of her mana to the noble artifact to easily blow up half of the plane. However, with such a large amount of mana provided by Silent Cry, Ishtar's noble phantasm was able to display an extraordinary effect. Half of the plain between the mountains was directly blown up by Ishtar's noble artifact. Countless demonic beasts were either burned to death by the flames or evaporated by the high temperature. Even if there were a few demonic beasts that were lucky enough to survive, they directly fell into the hole in the ground that was blown up by the explosion. Such a large number of demonic beasts were gone just like that. This could be considered a great victory for the humans. However, the demonic beast commanders definitely wouldn't die. Previously, even Yelidim didn't die under Wu Ming's multiple spells. Therefore, the two demonic beast commanders who were lucky to survive and fall into the collapsed plane definitely included the two demonic beast commanders who were still alive. After looking at Gadatsi and Matthew, who had already met up with Merlin, Wu Ming then looked at Ishtar. Ishtar, do you dare to gamble with me? Wu Ming's words piqued Ishtar's interest. Whoa, what is there that this goddess doesn't dare to do? Ishtar proudly puffed out her rather embarrassing chest, looking as if she wasn't afraid of anything. If that's the case, let's go to the underworld. No problem. However, after Ishtar agreed without hesitation, she was immediately dumbfounded. Wait, what did you say? On the ground, Gadatsi and Matthew, who were brought here by Wu Ming, stood together with Merlin and Nuwakamaru as they looked at the severely collapsed ground in front of them. They were both shocked by Ishtar and the large number of demonic beasts that died. Sure enough, Miss Ishtar is a true goddess. Matthew couldn't recover from the shock for a long time. Right, Merlin, is the demonic beast commander destroyed? Gadatsi, who recovered first, started to talk to Merlin. If it was just an attack like this, the demonic beast commander must still be alive. It probably fell into the underworld below. Walking to the edge of the collapsed ground, Merlin playfully put his head on his forehead and pretended to look down. What entered his eyes was a bottomless darkness. As far as Merlin was concerned, He couldn't see what was at the bottom of the darkness at all. Underworld. Gadotsi and Matthew were shocked when they heard this. An existence related to death was indeed a little uncomfortable for humans. The underworld of Kanzai is connected to the earth. Blowing up a big hole in the ground is the simplest and most violent way to enter the underworld. Gadotsi was shocked by Merlin's words about the underworld of Kanzai is connected to the earth. However, Matthew was quite concerned about another matter. Mr. Merlin, this should be the end of the Kanzai when the gods disappeared. Does the underworld still exist? Logically speaking, as the Kanzai faded away and the gods gradually disappeared, the underworld should have also dissipated and become non-existent. Therefore, Matthew was puzzled by Merlin's words about the demonic beast commander falling into the underworld. Ha ha ha, Matthew. Don't forget about the Three Goddesses Alliance. Merlin's tone was flirtatious as he smiled at Matthew. This made Matthew's cheeks turn red with shame. Then Gadotsi stood in front of Matthew and glared at Merlin. So that's how it is. Because the goddess of the underworld of Mesopotamia has returned to this era, the underworld was also brought over. Gadotsi's bracelet emitted Roman's voice. Roman, who was in Chaldea, spoke again while recording the information. But is it really so easy to enter the underworld? And the entire underground of Mesopotamia is the underworld? In the face of Roman's question, Merlin chuckled and laughed. Well, actually, I don't know much about it. Merlin smiled and scratched his head. However, whether it is the underworld or not, Hyunryeong will definitely go down. Speak of the devil. As soon as Merlin finished speaking, Gadotsi and Matthew saw Wuming and Ishtar rushing down from the sky. If only they could ignore the strange posture of Wuming and Ishtar. They saw Wuming pulling one of Ishtar's feet and flying down. Ishtar's face was dull, and it was obvious that she didn't understand what was going on. Is that His Excellency Hyunryeong? I heard that His Excellency Hyunryeong has returned. It's been a long time since we last met. Nwakamaru was deeply touched by the meeting between his peers and followers after half a year. Half a year ago, Wuming appeared in Uruk one step ahead of them. However, before they could get along and communicate, Wuming left. But in the past 6 months, only Musasobo Benkei, Leonidasai, and himself were left. However, Nwakamaru's question was not answered by Wuming, because Wuming pulled Ishtar and flew straight into the bottomless plain in front of everyone. Chapter 922. That. Is it really okay for Ms. Ishtar to go to the underworld? Matthew, who had read Mesopotamia's mythology, knew very well that Ishtar arrogantly entered the underworld and was killed by the goddess of the underworld. As a servant, the inheritance of being killed by the goddess of the underworld may cause the underworld to impose some restrictions on Ishtar. However, before anyone could answer Matthew's question, Ishtar's miserable scream came from the collapsed crater. Ah, no. Everyone looked at each other and smiled awkwardly. It turned out that Ishtar was forced by Wuming. At this moment, Gadotsi suddenly realized a problem. By the way, how do we go down? The way to go down? Well, whether it's me or Nwakamaru, we don't have the means to safely enter the underworld. If you want to enter the underworld, you have to jump down. Merlin nodded proudly. Jump down. Roman, who was in Chaldea, couldn't help but exclaim. The instruments in Chaldea were interfered with, and they couldn't detect how deep the crater was. How could they jump down directly in this situation? Ms. Nwakamaru, let's not talk about this for now. Matthew sighed helplessly. Merlin, what are you so proud of? Gadotsi looked at Merlin with contempt. Nwakamaru put her thin green into the scabbard and also sighed. Right now, we can only wait for the Uruk's reinforcements to arrive before making a decision. There are only a few of us, and we can't enter the underworld. Nyoruan was, after all, a former general. Before he could determine whether Wuming, Ishtar, and the others needed reinforcements, he could not act on impulse. But, Mr. Merlin, if we take this opportunity to support the senior Villo, can we take down the goddess of the underworld in one fell swoop? Matthew had a bold idea. Yes, if we support Assassin, maybe we can take down the goddess of the underworld in one fell swoop, and then we can focus on the goddess of warcraft. Thinking of this, Gadotsi excitedly pulled Matthew's hand and prepared to go to the underworld with Matthew. Wasn't just jumping down. Previously, when they came to this singularity, they had also experienced the experience of falling from high altitude. It was a new experience after all. However, Merlin blocked their way with his staff. It's not that easy. You two listen to me first. Merlin denied Gadotsi's suggestion. The underworld is full of death energy, and ordinary people can't stay there for a long time. Even if you wear a special magic dress, you can only stay there for a short period of time. Besides, Nawakamaru and I can't help. At most, we'll be a burden to the Villo. He already has Ishtar, and we don't need to send a few more burdens to burden him. Merlin became serious. Legend has it that in the underworld of the Mesopotamia, the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal, is the ruler of everything in the underworld. Any god in the underworld will be restricted by the underworld, and their divinity will be suppressed, making them powerless. Without divinity, they probably won't be weakened or suppressed, but if they aren't alive, I'm afraid they won't be able to exert their power. This was the opinion of Roman, who had urgently obtained information about the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal. That was why Merlin said that he couldn't help. Wait a minute. Won't Ishtar, an assassin, be in danger? Gadotsi was a little panicked. Ishtar was killed by the goddess of the underworld, and Wuming was a god in the Mesopotamia, Uruk Hyunryong. His divinity must be high, and Wuming's current identity was a servant, not a living being in that case. After entering the underworld, wouldn't they become the lambs to be slaughtered by Ereshkigal? But even if they are alive, there are still risks. Although the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal, can't leave the underworld, as long as she is in the underworld, she can enjoy the authority of the underworld. This is the most powerful ability of the goddess of the underworld. Even if she faces a living being who can ignore the restrictions of the underworld, Ereshkigal won't be at a disadvantage. In short, if it's as recorded in the myths, the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal, is an invincible existence in the underworld. In the end, Roman added. In other words, only the living and I can ignore the suppression of the underworld's authority and cause harm to Ereshkigal. Matthew nodded. If that's the case, can't we enter the underworld to support them? Gadotsi suggested. However, Merlin shook his head again. Tachika, how can you be sure that you and Matthew will encounter the Villo first and not Ereshkigal? If it's just Matthew and Ereshkigal fighting alone, although the chances of winning are not zero, it's not high either. Also, don't forget that the two demonic beast commanders also fell into the underworld together. Merlin's words were like the last straw that broke the camel's back. Gadotsi didn't know what to say. At this time, Nawakamaru, who had been quiet for a while, spoke. If it's only you and Matthew, if you encounter any one of them, even if Sir Matthew's shield can defend against the opponent's attack, it's only a matter of time before you lose. After all, the demonic beast commanders don't just have pure strength. And if you encounter both of them at the same time, although Nawakamaru didn't continue to speak, the result was inevitable death. As a surviving servant of the beheading operation, it can be said that I have a deeper understanding of the demonic beast commanders than you. Let's not talk about the lion-headed wugger. The other demonic beast commander, Musamafu, is not an ordinary person. It's not an existence that a servant can face alone. After Nawakamaru finished speaking, he walked directly toward the almost collapsed defensive barrier. I'm going to organize the soldiers and wait for the arrival of the Uruk's people before making a decision, and I believe that Sir Hyunryong will be fine. After Nawakamaru finished speaking and left, whether it was Gadotsi, Matthew, Roman, or Merlin, they didn't speak anymore, as if they were giving Gadotsi time to think. After a moment, Merlin opened his mouth. I'm also very worried about the Villo. After all, he's my close friend. However, worrying about him is useless. For now, we can only believe in the Villo. You must know that the Villo took the initiative to enter the underworld. Since he took the initiative to enter the underworld, then the Villo certainly won't make such a low-level mistake. Indeed, in the case of knowing that there is a tiger in the mountain, Only those who had a card up their sleeves would do something like going to the Tiger's Mountain. Otherwise, it would be a waste. Wuming was certainly not a person who would do something for free. He must have his own considerations. I know. I'm just a little bit worried about Assassin. At that moment, Gadatsi also recovered. Since it was already like this at this stage, then they should believe and wait. Chapter 923. Deep Underground in the Underworld. After Ishtar's noble phantasm caused the earth to shake, the entrance to the underworld was opened. Wuming brought Ishtar into the underworld. When they arrived at a path that looked like a stone bridge, Wuming let go of Ishtar's ankle and took a deep breath. As expected, the place is filled with the aura of death. Not only that, it was dark everywhere. Along the way, there were 1 or 2 cages that looked like spears with a floating blue flame. The entire underworld was filled with darkness and faint blue light. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Ishtar was lying there in pain. She struggled to get up and held her head as if she was having a headache. After Ishtar was brought into the underworld by Wuming in a rather rough way, she had bumped into many things along the way. Ishtar's head was the most injured. When Wuming let go of Ishtar, Ishtar's head hit the ground first. As expected, I shouldn't have trusted your perverted character. Ishtar rubbed her head as she stared at Wuming fiercely. As Wuming used to deal with Ishtar, he knew her very well. Not only that, Ishtar also had to deal with Wuming. Indirectly, Ishtar also had a good understanding of Wuming. Ishtar already knew that this guy was a perverted person. Now, Ishtar had a deeper impression of Wuming's perverted interests. Ah, you despicable guy. You know that the underworld has a natural suppressive effect on the gods. Why did you bring me in? Ishtar walked up to Wuming in a threatening manner, his eyes ferocious as he vented his grievances. Because we need to chase after the magical beast commander. Wuming naturally turned his head, spread his hands, and shrugged his shoulders with a helpless look. But why did you drag me in? Why don't you just come in yourself? Ishtar hugged her head with both hands. Her eyes were empty, as if she was in the depths of hell. Although the underworld was hell to Ishtar in a way, cough, cough. I'm not feeling too well. Maybe it's because of the death aura in the underworld. That's all. I'm leaving now. You can deal with the matter of the beast commander yourself. To put it bluntly, Ishtar wanted to escape. However, Wuming would not let Ishtar escape. Ishtar, help me kill the commander of the magical beasts and investigate the situation of the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal. Buzz. Ishtar's body glowed with a red light, as if she was under a command spell. That was the embodiment of the coercive power of the dependent contract. Yes, yes. Ishtar, who was about to turn around and leave, turned around and answered with difficulty. Oh, damn you, Hyunryeong. After that, Ishtar knelt on the ground with her hands on the ground and let out a sorrowful cry that moved even the underworld. Wuming's command from the dependent incarnation was different from the command spell. The command spell's command would be resisted to varying degrees depending on the details, the magic power of the servant, and other factors. The longer the command spell was delayed, the effect of the command spell would gradually weaken. Although the effect of the command spell could not completely disappear, in the end, the servant would be able to control the command spell to the extent that it would not affect them. However, Wuming's command came from the dependent incarnation. Wuming's ability to control his dependent was absolute. However, because Wuming and Ishtar signed a contract related to the magical beasts, Wuming could only use the magical beasts as the main command to forcibly control Ishtar. Under the influence of Wuming's command, the current Ishtar had no way to leave the underworld. Only by completing the command issued by Wuming, Ishtar could leave the underworld. Although it was somewhat inconvenient to use the command related to the magical beast to control Ishtar, there was no other way. The existence of Wuming's dependent was basically voluntary. Only Ishtar was tricked by Wuming to sign a temporary contract. That was to say, the contract between the two would be completely lifted after the magical beasts were eliminated and the goddess of magical beasts was defeated. It was basically impossible to make Ishtar sign a contract with Wuming from the bottom of her heart. If it was really possible to make Ishtar obediently sign a dependent contract from the bottom of her heart, then Ishtar would not be so naughty before. Although Wuming also considered setting a word trap to make Ishtar his dependent permanently, Wuming considered that the disadvantages of making Ishtar his dependent outweighed the advantages, so Wuming gave up on the idea. Although Ishtar was the mistress of the sky in Mesopotamia and was a rather powerful goddess, she was also a willful fool. If Wuming really used a word game to trick Ishtar and make her his dependent, it would certainly solve the problem of Ishtar's willfulness once and for all. However, if Wuming really did that, it would probably be enough for Wuming to suffer. In the end, Wuming would definitely end up tricking himself. Just the attributes of being a fool and a loser could make Wuming suffer. Through the past, Wuming was very sure of this. Let's go, Ishtar. We came to the underworld for business. After knocking Ishtar's head, Wuming took the lead and walked along the road. Damn it, I didn't want to come to the underworld. You were the one who dragged me here. Ishtar was now feeling very wronged. Why am I so unlucky to meet this guy, Hyunryong? God, Father God, where are you? Your daughter is now suffering under Hyunryong. Come and save your daughter. Ishtar, who was clearly a goddess, prayed to God. It was enough to see that Wuming was driving Ishtar crazy. Your father once asked me to take good care of you, and now I have a way to make you obedient. The way was, of course, referring to the dependent contract. Wuming turned around and looked at Ishtar, who was praying with her hands clasped together but was stunned by Wuming's words. I will teach you well during this time, stupid goddess Ishtar. In the end, Wuming gave Ishtar a rather pleasant smile, but this smile was like the smile of the devil in Ishtar's eyes. At this moment, before Ishtar could look forward to the cruel future, the roar of a magical beast came into their ears. Wuming and Ishtar looked at each other. Both of their eyes were full of solemnity. Immediately, Wuming ran directly in the direction of the roar of the magical beast, and Ishtar had no time to look forward to the cruel future and directly followed Wuming's footsteps. No matter what, dealing with the magical beast was the most important thing at the moment. Chapter 924. The one that roared must be the commander of the demonic beasts. There was no doubt about that. Not to mention that the mass-produced demonic beasts wouldn't be able to make such a loud roar. Even if there were some demonic beasts that weren't killed by Ishtar's noble phantasm and fell directly from the ground to the underworld, at such a height, even if it was a strengthened, mass-produced demonic beast, it would still be severely injured. Moreover, it would only be a serious injury and not a light one. Perhaps, only the demonic beast commanders with extremely strong physiques could fall to the underworld unscathed. Then, what did the uninjured magical beast commander encounter that caused him to let out such a bluffing roar filled with shock and panic? The answer was that the demonic beast commanders were attacked by the garrulous spirits. The roads in the underworld went from the top to the bottom. They were all stone bridges that were naturally formed in the underworld. The stone bridges intersected with each other and extended downwards like a maze. But apart from that, there were also places where a few stone bridges converged to form a platform in the underworld. At this moment, Wuming and the rather reluctant Ishtar stood at the edge of a stone bridge and looked down at the platform that was formed by the stone bridges. There was a gigantic humanoid creature that was covered in red fur, but had the head of a ferocious lion. It was one of the 11 demonic beast commanders, the lion-headed Wugger. Surrounding the tall Wugger was a group of skeletons with huge claws that didn't have legs. Their claws were as big as the heads of these skeletons. These skeletons were the garrulous spirits. The garrulous spirits emerged from all over the place and swarmed towards Wugger as if they had seen their enemy. Since these garrulous spirits had no legs and were in the underworld, they all floated in the air of the underworld. Because of this, these garrulous spirits were all over Wudgel's body. His head, back, legs, claws, and even a mane on his neck were all firmly grasped by the garrulous spirits with their giant claws. No matter how hard Wudgel struggled, he couldn't shake off the garrulous spirits. His physical attacks were basically useless against the garrulous spirits because they were spirits, Every time the garrulous spirit was torn apart by a claw, it would recover in less than a second. The garrulous spirit's claws, on the other hand, were firmly fixed on Ajar's body while constantly dealing damage to him. Claw marks appeared on Mount Wudjil, and traces of blood appeared on Wudjil's body, attracting even more garrulous spirits to swarm him. It had to be said that the demon commander's physique was truly tyrannical. If it were a servant, perhaps their spirit base would have already been forced to retreat after withstanding so many garrulous spirits' attacks. However, Wudjil was still as lively as ever. Even the angry roar produced by the garrulous spirits was particularly powerful. The demon commander's physique is extremely strong, but it is precisely because of this that they appear to be in a predicament when facing spirits without a physical body. Like a commentator, Wu Ming said lightly, and Ishtar heard it clearly. However, Ishtar didn't care about it. But this is a demon commander that is comparable to the Father God. The implication was that only those ordinary mass-produced demons lacked the means to deal with spirits. For a demon commander that was not on the same level as a mass-produced demon commander, how could it only have an advantage in terms of physique? Wudjil is the lion of the sun. It certainly can't be that its physique is far beyond imagination. After Ishtar finished speaking, as if to reflect Ishtar's words, Wudjil finally stopped using its claws to deal with the garrulous spirits. Wudjil opened its mouth wide, and a sun-like radiance appeared in the underworld. In an instant, the garrulous spirits that were attacking Wudjil were stimulated and retreated. Some of the garrulous spirits that were particularly close to Wudjil even died from the intense radiance. In the next second, the radiance hidden in Wudjil's mouth turned into flames. The instant Wudjil swung its head to the surroundings, the flames were like rays that shot out in all directions. The fire of the sun engulfed a large number of garrulous spirits, and a large number of garrulous spirits perished in an instant in agony. Although the garrulous spirits didn't let out any screams due to the fact that they were spirits, it didn't affect Wudjil's mood at this moment. Roar! Wudjil let out a victorious roar, and its roar echoed throughout the underworld. Why, aren't you going to attack? Now is a good opportunity to get rid of Wudjil, isn't it? Ishtar looked at Wu Ming. Although a sneak attack wasn't a good thing, this was war. In a war between humans and demons, the true essence of war was to win by any means necessary. Besides, demons didn't have human rights. A sneak attack would be over. However, Wu Ming still chose to wait and see. Don't worry, someone will come and take care of this guy. Just by killing a few garrulous spirits, it let out a triumphant roar that resounded throughout the underworld. Who did it think it was? It could only be said that this prototype Wudjil's brain wasn't as good as the prototype Yelidim that Wu Ming killed. It didn't understand whose territory it was. This was the territory of the underworld goddess, one of the three goddesses' alliance. The underworld goddess was an existence that was on par with the goddess of magical beasts. Demons of the goddess of magical beasts, why are you behaving so atrociously in my underworld? Why are you provoking me? The voice of a creator resounded throughout the underworld, and Wudjil subconsciously shut its mouth. Ishtar was so frightened that she trembled. At the same time, Ishtar also understood who Wu Ming was referring to when he said someone will come and take care of Wudjil. It sounded a little like your voice. Wu Ming glanced at Ishtar. However, Ishtar rolled her eyes at Wu Ming. What nonsense are you talking about? This voice clearly belongs to Ereshkigal. Ishtar didn't want to talk about Ereshkigal. It could be said that other than Wu Ming, only Ereshkigal could give Ishtar a headache. After all, Ereshkigal had once stripped, pierced, and killed Ishtar when she was in the underworld. Before Ishtar could recall the past, Ereshkigal spoke again. Since you dare to behave atrociously in my underworld, prepare to die. Chapter 925. However, the words that sounded like a death sentence did not strike fear in Yukur. Although Wudjil had subconsciously shut its mouth, it did not mean that it was afraid. Perhaps this was what the saying, "the ignorant are fearless," meant. Roar! Perhaps Yucker's brain was really not working well. It actually roared at the majestic voice in the void, as if it was provoking it. Is it crazy? Wuming, who could understand the language of the monsters, naturally knew what Yucker was doing. After translating and subtracting the profanities, it was more or less bring it on. But a mere Yucker actually dared to challenge the goddess of the underworld alone? Both Wuming and Ishtar knew that Yucker would die without a doubt. As expected, after Wudjil let out a roar, black and gray stone pillars rose from the ground at irregular angles, as if they were dead. They firmly restrained Wudjil's limbs. Although the sudden restriction gave Wudjir a fright, he did not show any signs of panic or any other emotions. Wudjir actually used brute force to break the rock pillar into pieces. Roar! Yucker stomped on the rock pillars until they were crushed under its feet. Then, it let out another roar of victory. This guy is definitely done for. Ishtar could not bear to look at the scene in front of him. To provoke Ereshki Gale in such a manner. If the original Yuger was supposed to die, then perhaps even its soul would be shattered by Ereshki Gale. As the other half of Ereshkigal and Ishtar's trip to the underworld, Ishtar understood Ereshkigal quite well. After Wuggal let out what he thought was a victorious roar, but it was actually a declaration before his death. More rock pillars rose from the ground and restrained Wuggal's body and limbs. However, after being restrained once again, Wudjil was still about to use his brute force to break free. At that moment, the rock pillars instantly exploded and were replaced by spears of light. At the same time, they replaced the rock pillars to restrain Wudjil's body even more. That's Ereshkigal's spear. Ishtar frowned at the scene as if she recalled something bad. However, the light spears were no different from the rock pillars to Yucker. It was just a matter of whether they looked good or not. However, just as Wudjir was about to use the brute strength his mother had bestowed upon him to break free from the spears of light, a large number of new spears of light instantly appeared on the spears of light. They pierced into Wudjir's flesh, causing him to cry out in pain. Roar, roar, roar. The light spears didn't miss a single part of Yucker's body. From top to bottom, head, neck, shoulders, chest, back, waist, abdomen, legs, knees, arms, and joints, they didn't miss a single spot. And because they pierced into Yucker's limbs, waist, and abdomen, Yucker's brute force was sealed and he couldn't use it anymore. I didn't expect Yucker to be able to withstand this attack. From Ishtar's point of view, being pierced by these light spears in the underworld was basically equivalent to death. But Yucker relied on the strength of his body to prevent all the light spears from piercing into his body. I have to say, I really can't underestimate a magical beast commander. Ishtar's expression turned grave. She finally understood how powerful a magical beast commander was. If she were in Wudjil's shoes, her spirit base wouldn't be able to withstand these spears of light without any defenses. She would have been pierced in an instant. It could only be said that one of the magical beast commanders, the original Wuggal, was not very smart. Otherwise, with such a powerful physique, it would have been able to escape from the underworld before Ereshki Gale made his move. But this Yucker was like a stubborn donkey. He didn't have the slightest intention to beg for mercy or repent. Instead, he opened his mouth and condensed the light of the sun again. Yucker's eyes were filled with the desire to kill and take revenge. How could this guy still want revenge in such a situation? Did he become arrogant because he didn't die time and time again? Or was Yucker really that confident in himself? Wuming felt that it was the former. No, this wasn't a problem of arrogance or confidence. To be more precise, it should be a problem with Yucker's brain. In the legends, it was described that Tiamat's son, Kingu, led the magical beast to fight against the gods. The reason why Kingu led the magical beast was probably because the magical beasts sired by Tiamat weren't intelligent enough. Wu Ming guessed that the reason why the demonic beast lost was probably because there was a problem with their IQ. This might be the price to pay for obtaining great power. Tiamat's 11 sons are probably lacking in intelligence. Wu Ming shook his head regretfully. But then, for some reason, Wu Ming's nose suddenly itched and he looked like he was about to sneeze. This gave Ishtar a fright. She hurriedly slapped Wuming's mouth. Wuming stared at Ishtar. His eyes conveyed the meaning of "you've got guts." But Ishtar stared back at Wuming. "Don't drop the ball at this time." Ishtar looked at Wuming with a dissatisfied expression. Just as Wuming was about to have a problem, Wu Jier also had a problem. In the next second, a garrulous spirit that was several times larger than the other garrulous spirits and about the same size as Yukur appeared above Yukur. This garrulous spirit held a huge, slender spear of light and slowly raised it high. Die! The garrulous spirit, who issued the majestic voice of Ereshkigal Gal, was like the grim reaper who granted equal death to the people of the world. It raised its spear of light high up in the air and thrust it at Yukur. At this moment, Yukur finally sensed danger. If the spear of light pierced him from above, he would not be able to survive. As for whether he could pierce through its skull, Wujel didn't have the slightest confidence this time, because Wujel recognized that the huge, garrulous spirit above its head was actually the goddess of the underworld herself. The spear of light in her hand was a genuine artifact that far surpassed the toughness of a magical beast's body. Roar! A beastly howl came from Yukur's mouth. It seemed that Yukur had sensed that true death was approaching. Poochie! Chapter 926. Blood splattered all over the rock platform, and Ujar stopped moving. Wuming, who had witnessed such a cruel scene, did not do anything. Ishtar, who did move, only felt pity for Ujar's intelligence. No wonder these demonic beast commanders have not taken down the humans even after 3 months. It's because of their intelligence. Ishtar had to admit that King Gilgamesh was indeed a virtuous king, but the intelligence of the demonic beast commanders was also a major factor that affected the demonic beast battlefront. All right, the demonic beast commanders have been eliminated. Let's go, Ishtar said, and wanted to leave quietly without alerting Ereshkigal. But haven't you noticed? We've been discovered long ago. Wuming looked at Ishtar in disdain. Wuming felt that Ishtar's intelligence was on par with the demonic beast commanders, as expected of an idiotic goddess. Is that so? But at this point, Ishtar also noticed the problem. After Ereshkigal's giant, garrulous spirit killed Ujar and absorbed his soul into the spear of light in her hand, she stood still and looked at Wuming and Ishtar. Although there were a lot of rocks covering the two of them, there is no doubt that Ereshkigal had discovered them. Ereshkigal is the mistress of the underworld. You can say that when we entered the underworld, Ereshkigal already knew. As the only god in the underworld, Ereshkigal's authority was beyond imagination. But that was all. That's true. Ishtar's shoulders drooped helplessly, and she looked powerless. Ereshkigal only spoke after Ishtar showed a powerless look, as if she was waiting to see Ishtar make a fool of herself. Yurak Hyenryong, mistress of the sky Ishtar, I already know why you are here. The demonic beast Ujar has been killed by me, and the other demonic beast Musamafu has escaped from the underworld. There is nothing you want here. Leave quickly. Wuming could not help but have a trace of doubt. Wuming also guessed that Ereshkigal might not attack him and Ishtar, but Wuming did not expect Ereshkigal to let him and Ishtar leave just like that. Obviously, the other party was a member of the Three Goddesses Alliance. Obviously, the other party was a goddess who was hostile to humans. How could she let them go so easily? Obviously, they were on the side of humans. How could she let them go so easily? Damn it. Just listening to Ereshkigal's arrogant tone made Ishtar quite angry. However, Ishtar's brain was not as bad as Ujar's. At that moment, Ishtar pulled Wuming's arm. You see, Ereshkigal also let us leave, let's go. However, Wuming was not moved, because Wuming came to the underworld not only to eliminate the demonic beast commander. Wuming's order to Ishtar was also very clear. Eliminate the demonic beast and investigate the underworld goddess. It's not easy to have the opportunity to get in touch with Ereshkigal. You can leave first. Wuming's order to Ishtar to eliminate the demonic beast commander had been completed, so the power from the dependence that restricted Ishtar from leaving the underworld had disappeared, and Ishtar could leave the underworld now. You want to face Ereshkigal alone. The original whisper was also raised a few decibels because of surprise. Hey, although I don't want to admit it, you are the strongest on our side, right? How can you face one of the three goddesses' alliance alone? What if something happens? Ishtar lowered her voice as much as possible and leaned over Wuming's ear and nagged. However, the response to Ishtar was Wuming's palm. I actually let an idiot like you worry about me. How embarrassing. Wuming's palm pressed onto Ishtar's beautiful face, which could be considered as a response to Ishtar's previous slap on his face. Damn, I'm not worried about you. I'm just worried. If you die, my reward will go down the drain. Ishtar struggled to pull Wuming's hand up from her face while looking for an excuse for herself like a proud textbook. Helplessly smiling, Wuming finally persuaded Ishtar to leave. You should go back to the surface first. I'm a little worried about the escaped Musu Mafu. Ereshkigal would not lie about this kind of thing, so the other demonic beast commander, Musu Mafu, must have escaped. Looks like the demonic beast commander is not completely brainless like Wugger. At least the demonic beast commander, Musu Mafu, would escape, unlike the stubborn Wugger. In the end, Ishtar also compromised. I know, you be careful. After Ishtar finished speaking, she summoned the heavenly ship's horse Anna, placed her hand on the horse Anna, and Ishtar slowly rose. No matter what, since Ereshkigal is willing to let us leave, it probably means that she doesn't have any ill intentions towards us. However, when she said this, Ishtar felt awkward. How could Ereshkigal not have any ill intentions toward her? In short, you should be careful with your words. There shouldn't be any danger. You are the god that Enkidu once believed in. Even if it's because of Enkidu who treated Ereshkigal with respect, she will still let you go. I know. You should leave quickly. I am your senior in terms of seniority. How can a junior instruct a senior? You, on the other hand, don't be ambushed by another demonic beast commander when you pass through the exit that connects the underworld to the surface. Musu Mafu must have escaped from the entrance to the underworld, which was the collapsed ground that Ishtar blasted open. It was impossible for it to escape from other places. I know. What a hateful guy, nagging like an old man. So what if you were my senior? Humph. Ishtar turned her head and left angrily. Old man. Wuming subconsciously touched his chin. Although he looked young, and was definitely much younger than Ishtar, he was someone who was on the same level as Ishtar's father, the main god of Sumer. In short, he would definitely take advantage of Ishtar. What else do you want? Uruk Hyunryong. The conversation between Wuming and Ishtar was actually being monitored by Ereshkigal. Although she was still speechless towards Ishtar, Ereshkigal was more concerned about why Wuming was looking for her. Ereshkigal knew that the reason Wuming was looking for her was definitely not as simple as the reason that Wuming used to brush off Ishtar. Ereshkigal, Enkidu's tomb is still there, right? Chapter 9:27. That's right. Wuming cared about nothing else but Enkidu's tomb. According to Gilgamesh of this world, after Enkidu of this world died, because Enkidu treated Ereshkigal with respect when he was alive, his corpse was buried in the underworld by Ereshkigal. In the Mesopotamia of the parallel world that Wuming experienced, Enkidu's soul was preserved by Wuming, and his corpse was given to Gilgamesh to deal with. It was probably buried in the underworld as well. After all, regardless of which world Enkidu was in, he respected Ereshkigal. Enkidu's tomb, the huge garrulous spirit that Ereshkigal transformed and shook its body and rejected Wuming in the end. Why should I tell thee? As it spoke, the huge garrulous spirit's skeleton emitted a scarlet and terrifying light as if it was angry. I allowed you to leave because you only entered the underworld to hunt down magical beasts and didn't behave atrociously. I haven't even punished you for the crime of exploding the sky of my underworld. However, Wuming was not flustered at all. After the gods disappeared, the underworld should have disappeared as well. It's only because of your reappearance that the underworld returned with you. However, the underworld that returned with you should only be a part of it. Hearing this, the huge, garrulous spirit maintained its fierce posture, but did not continue with its next move. Wuming was right. If it was the underworld of the past, it would have spread throughout the entire Mesopotamia. However, after the gods disappeared, the mysterious existence of the underworld also disappeared. However, because Ereshkigal descended as a servant, as a goddess who could not leave the underworld naturally appeared with Ereshkigal. However, because it was an accessory of Ereshkigal, the underworld didn't appear as widely as before. You've guessed correctly. The underworld is indeed limited to Khuzar City and the surrounding areas. Ereshkigal admitted to it. Coincidentally, Khuzar City was located in the northwest of Uruk. It was near the place where Ishtar had blown up half of the plains with her relic. That was why the underground of that place was connected to the underworld. And seeing Ereshkigal admit it, Wuming also gave an answer to this problem. If that's the case, you can move the underworld. That way, the entrance that was blasted open will no longer be an entrance. It will just be an ordinary hole. If it was only a part of the underworld, Ereshkigal could move it with her authority. Although the process might be slow and long, Ereshkigal could do it. Why should I choose to give in? The gigantic, garrulous spirit that represented Ereshkigal was a little annoyed. Wasn't it the same as asking Ereshkigal to move a part of the underworld that came with her? Wasn't it the same as asking Ereshkigal to show that she couldn't defeat it? I'm doing this for your sake, Ereshkigal. Don't forget about the monster that escaped. It will definitely report the general location of the underworld to the goddess of magical beasts. It's a terrible thing for the base camp to be discovered, isn't it? This made Ereshkigal fall into deep thought. Indeed, because of its body, Musumaf didn't fall directly into the depths of the underworld like usual. Instead, it fell very close to the ground. Moreover, it had a snake body, so it quickly climbed up the cliff and escaped from the underworld. If it really returned to the northern fir forest, it would definitely know about the situation in the underworld. In a situation where he was unable to leave the underworld and the opponent still had several magical beast commanders with extremely strong physiques, Ereshkigal would indeed be at a disadvantage. Although Ereshkigal knew that the goddess of magical beast base camp was in the fir forest, she couldn't leave the underworld. It was only a few nights ago that she could use Ishtar's body, which represented her, to walk on the ground. Now that Ishtar was with Wuming and the others, the idea of using Ishtar's body to walk on the ground had become unrealistic. After saying so much, aren't you still thinking for the sake of humans? Although she didn't know why Wuming would suggest that Ereshkigal move the underworld, Wuming's actions were definitely not harmful to humans. Even if it wasn't for the sake of humans, it definitely wouldn't affect humans. Today, I will tell you that my underworld has already begun to expand and move. Once it succeeds, I will capture all the souls of humans and bring them to my underworld. I will build a kingdom of the dead filled with souls. In other words, you are protecting humans in disguise. Wuming's words stunned Ereshkigal, and she didn't know what to say. If it were any other gods other than the few Sumer gods who truly love humans who say that they want to protect humans, I might be suspicious. However, if it's you, Ereshkigal, I'm willing to believe it. Ereshkigal had been in the underworld since she was born until the gods retreated and the gods disappeared. It could be said that she didn't have much contact with the outside world. Moreover, because of her fixed position, Ereshkigal didn't have any thoughts of fighting for a god's position. She had been diligently taking care of the underworld. How could a god like her, who was destined to be restricted for her entire life, have any desire? Humans were born with good natures. It was the same for gods. A god who was set up after birth and didn't have much contact with the outside world didn't seem like a god who would harm humans. Although Wuming had never met Ereshkigal before, Wuming believed that Ereshkigal, who had been diligently taking care of the underworld for her entire life, wouldn't become an existence that opposed Mesopotamia. Most importantly, Ereshkigal buried Enkidu's body in the underworld because Enkidu treated her with respect. A god who could make Enkidu treat her with respect couldn't possibly be an evil god, right? Ew. What are you saying? The huge garrulous spirit's tone suddenly changed. This made Wuming jump, and he froze on the spot. This voice was almost exactly the same as Ishtar's. However, there was a shyness in this voice that Ishtar didn't have. Ereshkigal, who realized that something was wrong, immediately adjusted herself. Ahem. Anyway, my underworld will be decided by me. I will send the garrulous spirit and thou to guide the way. Once you're done inspecting Enkidu's tomb, leave immediately. As soon as she finished speaking, the huge, garrulous spirit turned into a blood-red liquid and melted into the rocks of the underworld, disappearing. Chapter 928. Sure enough, there's more to it. If Wuming was only guessing about Ereshkigal before, then now Wuming was sure about Ereshkigal. He was sure that Ereshkigal was on the side of humans. However, Ereshkigal deviated from the right path. In a sense, she was an enemy of humans. However, as long as her thoughts were for humans, there was a way to change her. This can be considered another breakthrough point for the Three Goddesses Alliance after Quizzer. If the goddess of the underworld also defected, two pillars of the Three Goddesses Alliance would be on Wuming's side. Then the Three Goddesses Alliance would really exist in name only. In this way, humans could also deal with the goddess of warcraft with peace of mind. However, Ereshkigal seemed to be quite extreme. It was better not to be too anxious. At that moment, Wuming decided to investigate Enkidu's tomb in this world first, and then make a decision about the next action. As early as the huge, garrulous spirit transformed by Ereshkigal disappeared, a garrulous spirit the size of an ordinary person emerged from the crack of the rock and walked to Wuming. It stopped in place and seemed to be waiting for Wuming. Let's go. Take me to Enkidu's tomb. Although Wuming felt a little awkward, he felt a little sorry for Enkidu at that moment. The garrulous spirit turned around silently and floated in a certain direction. Over there. After looking at his general direction, Wuming followed the garrulous spirit. After all, Wuming still had to go back the way he came. The garrulous spirit's speed wasn't slow, but Wuming was able to keep up, so Wuming soon arrived in front of Enkidu's tomb. It was a small stone platform with empty spear cages around it. Chains wrapped around the spear cages and surrounded this place. It should be like this. At this moment, in Wuming's eyes, the spear cages around Enkidu's tomb were all crooked, and some were even pulled out. The chains around the spear cages were also violently broken and scattered on the ground. In the center of the stone platform, there was a pit that seemed to have been dug by a beast. Anyone could see that what was originally buried in this pit must be Enkidu's body or the god's soil. As expected, Enkidu, your body in this world is gone. As if receiving instructions, golden light spots of light appeared on Wuming's body. A silver chain appeared and wrapped around Wing's arms and waist. Clank, clank. The chains clanged against each other, as if they were responding to Wuming. Did the demonic beast do this? Or did Gidea's minions do this? The traces left behind told Wuming that the one who took away Enkidu's corpse wasn't an elegant person. To be able to leave behind such a messy scene, it was either a monster without much rationality or one of Gaia's minions, one of the 72 demons. After all, from the appearance of Enkidu on the side of the demonic beasts and the fact that Enkidu's body was stolen, the other party was definitely not on the side of humans. But after thinking about it carefully, Wuming rejected both possibilities. I'm afraid Gaia did it herself. Master, why are you so sure? At this time, Wuming's head lit up. The seemingly ordinary dragon horn headpiece made a sound. Because the timeline doesn't match, Wuming casually answered Kalis, and then explained to her in detail. The demonic beasts were produced by the goddess of demonic beasts, and Enkidu obviously appeared together with the goddess of demonic beasts, so it was unlikely that the goddess of demonic beasts did it. The demon god pillars could appear in various eras of human history and disrupt those eras, making those eras become singularities. It seemed like they traveled through time and space, but if observed carefully, Those eras were all after the Magic King's era. The demon god pillars were passed down from generation to generation. When they reached a certain era, they would awaken and disrupt human history. Master, what do you know this? Collis was puzzled, because when I was in Atlas Courtyard, I met Sherlock Holmes. At that time, when Gadotsi, Matthew, and Leonardo da Vinci were brought into Atlas Courtyard by Sherlock Holmes, Wooming followed behind them. When Gadotsi, Matthew, and Leonardo da Vinci left Atlas Courtyard, Sherlock Holmes, who had already deduced that Wooming would come, had a conversation with Wooming in Atlas Courtyard. The reason why Wooming appeared behind Gadotsi and others was because Wooming had just come out of Atlas Courtyard. After all, the other party is a detective, and he even used a three-pointed Hermes. There were some things that I needed his help with, so I went to look for him. At that time, Collis fell into the box world with Wooming's body, so it was normal that she didn't know about these things. If Collis was here, there would be no need for Collis at all. Collis' database is 100 times stronger than a detective's brain. Collis' tone was a little sour. Indeed, if Collis had followed Wooming the whole time, with Collis' ability, there would be no problem answering Wooming's questions through every little thing along the way. Unfortunately, Collis wasn't by Wooming's side at that time. Helpless, Wooming could only ask Wooming for help. It's just a coincidence that you weren't here. Don't be jealous. My exclusive magic costume is lapis lazuli, Collis Barrett. At that moment, Collis didn't speak anymore, as if she was shy, but a shy magic costume. It could only be said that it was indeed the work of Gemstone Master, and the emotional system was also at the peak of its level. In short, including Winterwood City, the first 7 singularities were all created by a technique called the Demon God Pillar that was hidden in the human genes and passed down to a fixed age. In this year 2655 BC, the Demon God Pillar couldn't have appeared no matter what, so this singularity could only be handled by Gydia personally. Although Gydia could also teleport the Demon God Pillar to this singularity, Wooming's intuition told him that this singularity was set up by Gydia without anyone else's help. Then, in other words, Enkidu's body might be the real Enkidu. The silver chain on Wooming's hand couldn't help but shake, as if it was angry that its body was being used by the enemy. Gently pacifying the restless silver chain, Wooming fell into deep thought as he recalled the past. No wonder that Enkidu had a strange reaction when it saw me. Perhaps Enkidu's body affected the unknown soul within. At that moment, Wooming revealed a smile. But since it's the real Enkidu in a certain sense, it's very advantageous for us. Because the only god that Enkidu believed in and served was the Uruk Hyunryong, which was also Wooming himself. Chapter 929. After Wooming finished investigating Enkidu, he came to the surface from the underworld through the ground that was blown up by Ishtar. Putting the fake Enkidu aside, Gadotsi, Matthew, and the others were still on the surface. Although Merlin was there, and Gadotsi and Matthew wouldn't go to the underworld to find him, they definitely wouldn't leave. Maybe they were still waiting for him nearby. No matter what, he had to go up and say hello, and then go back to Uruk. And Wooming hadn't gone back to Uruk since he returned to Mesopotamia. It would be good to report to Gilgamesh about Enkidu. Standing at the edge of the collapsed ground, Wooming looked back at the huge crater behind him and nodded. This way, the demonic beasts can be prevented from coming here. It was an unexpected surprise. After all, the surrounding area had collapsed, and the demonic beasts couldn't choose to enter the underworld and then climb up. That was equivalent to provoking Ereshkigal, and they would definitely be killed. While Wooming was talking, the girl's excited voice came from behind him. Assassin! Wooming turned his head and saw Gadotsi running while waving at him, and Matthew was behind her with a panicked face. For a moment, Matthew, who was a demi-servant, couldn't catch up with Gadotsi, who was an ordinary human. Senpai, please slow down. When she was close to Wooming, Gadotsi suddenly flew toward Wooming. Wooming quickly opened his hands, took a few steps forward, and caught Gadotsi. Assassin, are you okay? Gadotsi looked worried. However, Wuming knocked Gadatsi's little head. If you're so impatient, I'll be in trouble. Senior. Matthew, who came to the two of them, was panting heavily and looked quite uncomfortable. Because he was too anxious to catch up with Gadatsi, Matthew didn't have much time to catch his breath. Look at you, Matthew. Don't do this again. Wuming immediately let go of Gadatsi and went to Matthew's back to rub Matthew's back. He then injected his mana into Matthew's body to relieve Matthew's fatigue. I'm sorry, Matthew. I was too anxious. Gadatsi also came over to apologize to Matthew. When she found out that Wuming's spirit base was nearby, she immediately ran over. It's okay, Senior. I understand that you're worried about Vi. Senior Villo. Although he was relieved, Matthew was still panting heavily. It seemed that he needed a little rest. Tachika, you should calm down in the future. A demonic beast commander escaped. If you're so rash, it will be troublesome if it ambushes you halfway. Gadatsi didn't care about anything just now. After receiving the news that Wuming appeared here, she directly ran over. Matthew was also worried about Gadatsi's safety, so he was out of breath and followed her. Don't worry about that. The demonic beast commander has left. A voice came from behind Wuming. Wuming turned his head and saw that it was Ishtar. You're okay? That's great. Wuming's tone was rather flat as he nodded. Ishtar knew very well what Wuming meant by nothing happened. Wuming meant that Ishtar was not ambushed by the demonic beast commander. However, knowing was one thing, but Wuming's perfunctory attitude made Ishtar quite unhappy. You bastard. I was worried that Ereshkigal would imprison you in the underworld, and you're actually looking forward to something happening to me? At that moment, Ishtar was like an angry cat, staring fiercely at Wuming. Miss Ishtar was indeed ambushed by Musumaf nearby, but because we were all stationed not far away, nothing happened to Ishtar. Matthew, who had recovered his breath, also began to explain. Who would have thought that that guy was actually hiding underground? It actually managed to hide such a huge thing. Ishtar became irritated at the thought of this. It could be said that if it weren't for Wuming's reminder, she would have been eaten by Musumaf by now. Devouring a god would bring about considerable growth for a demonic beast. It was the same reason why Yelidim wanted to devour Wuming. It was no wonder that Musumaf would hide and wait like a sinister viper. Sure enough, the demonic beast commander isn't all brainless. After all, those brainless demonic beast commanders were most likely dead, and the remaining ones were probably some meticulous fellows. Wuming couldn't help but become serious. I'm sorry, Ishtar. It's my mistake. I should have let you leave with me. Wuming really didn't expect that Musumaf would actually ambush here. The reason why he said demonic beasts might ambush was just to scare Ishtar and Gadatsi. After all, those who escaped in such a situation would definitely choose to leave. In the end, Musumaf actually chose to ambush them. It can only be said that Musumaf was bold enough. If Wuming and Ishtar were to come out together, and if Wuming were to find out, Musumaf would definitely follow in his footsteps today. Wuming couldn't let the tiger return to the mountain, no matter what. Wuming really regretted that he didn't let Ishtar stay a little longer. Wuming's regretful expression in Ishtar's eyes turned into self-blame for her danger, which made Ishtar didn't know what to say for a while. Wuming apologizing to Ishtar in such a serious way was really rare for Ishtar. It could be said that it was basically impossible for such a situation to happen. The relationship between the two was actually not that bad, but basically every time they met, they would have to mock and ridicule each other. It had almost become a habit. Ishtar was also affected by the girl's body this time as a pseudo-servant, so she didn't quarrel with Wuming. However, Wuming wasn't a pseudo-servant, and he wasn't affected by it. How could he apologize so easily? This made Ishtar feel quite awkward. At the moment, Ishtar also began to speak hesitantly. This is not your fault. After all, you also told me if I could come out with you, I would definitely not let Musum escape. I really missed a great opportunity to kill another demonic beast commander. Wuming clenched his left fist and hammered his right hand, directly interrupted Ishtar's speech, and his expression became even more regretful. As the saying goes, the more you think about it, the angrier you get. The more you take a step back, the more you think about it. Wu Ming's current state was more or less the same. However, Wu Ming's words made Ishtar, Gadatsi, and Matthew stunned on the spot. The meaning of Wu Ming's words was already very obvious. He wasn't worried about Ishtar, but he regretted missing the opportunity to kill the demonic beast commander. Gadatsi and Matthew couldn't help but swallow their saliva, silently looking at Ishtar, who had lowered her head and exuded a terrifying aura. Sure enough, Ishtar also lived up to everyone's expectations and shouted out what Gadatsi and Matthew thought was right at the moment. "You bastard!" Chapter 9:30. After Wu Ming made a scene with Ishtar, the four of them returned to the nearby encampment. This was a place close to the defensive barrier. Although it had not collapsed yet, many of the barriers were already in a state of collapse and were about to collapse. However, they could still be used temporarily after temporary repairs. Not only that, under the command of Nawakaru, the soldiers also set up temporary tent-like residences adjacent to the defensive barrier. Oh, you all returned safely. I knew that nothing would happen. Merlin was the first to come out of the tent to welcome everyone. However, it seemed that you guys were a little noisy just now. I was very self-aware and didn't come out. If Merlin had also joined in, the situation would have become even more serious. It's just that the joke was a little too harsh, and someone couldn't take it. Wu Ming said and glanced at Ishtar. "Oomph." Ishtar snorted and turned her head to the side after realizing that Wu Ming was looking at her. Gadatsi and Matthew saw this scene and smiled helplessly and awkwardly. In short, the two people who went deep into the underworld have returned safely. Although the commander of the magical beasts, Musu Maf, was released, the other commander of the magical beasts, Wugger, was killed in the underworld for provoking the goddess of the underworld. Mashu began to report and smiled. One of the commanders of the magical beasts was killed and the other escaped, but we have 0 casualties in the end. There's no better result than this. Indeed, putting the number of enemies aside, the number of casualties on their side was the most important thing. The demons did not rush to the fortress. The collapse of the fortress was entirely the result of Ishtar's noble artifact. Therefore, the soldiers did not suffer any casualties. Needless to say, Gadatsi and the others did not suffer any casualties. The task of killing and chasing the demons was completed by Ishtar and Wu Ming. It was just that when Ishtar flew up, he was almost ambushed by Musu Maf. However, because Ishtar was vigilant because of Wu Ming's words, Musu Maf's ambush failed, although Wu Ming was quite upset that Musu Maf managed to escape. Moreover, the ground here has also collapsed because of Ishtar's noble phantasm. It's directly connected to the underworld. I'm afraid that the magical beasts will have to take a detour even if they want to come here. Wu Ming added, it could be said that this was undoubtedly a man-made natural moat. In other words, we don't need to set up defensive facilities here. Gadatsi expressed her opinion. Even so, we have to consult with King Gilgamesh before we can make a decision. Nawakamaru walked over from the camp behind everyone and expressed his opinion. Why don't we talk in the tent? We can also let Mr. Hyunryong have a good rest. Nawakamaru pointed at the tent not far behind him. Wu Ming shook his head and declined. I'm not tired. I'm just taking advantage of the situation to have a chat here. After all, they were almost all here. If there was anything, they could just stand there and simply summarize it. There was no need to sit down and have a formal discussion. Besides, we do have to consult with Gil. Besides, I have something to report. I'm going to return to Uruk immediately. Gadatsi was stunned when she heard Wu Ming's words. Then what should we do? Gadatsi and the others originally received the first order given to them by King Gilgamesh to go to the jungle in the southwest to help the Quetzalcoatl. However, they didn't even see the Quetzalcoatl's face before they were led by Wu Ming to the Abif Mountains in the northwest. They were directly across the Mesopotamia. The first order was such a mess. Not to mention, Gadotsi and the others couldn't continue to stay here. Even if they didn't go to Uruk with Wuming, they had to return to the jungle in the southwest. The most important thing was that Anna was still there. Senior Villo, why don't you send us back to the jungle? Matthew felt that since Ishtar had been recruited, they should go back and meet up with Anna. I'm not going to leave you here. Come back to Uruk with me. After Wuming finished speaking, he looked at Ishtar. You also come back to Uruk with us to see Gil. Ishtar was dumbfounded. Hey! In Uruk City, in a corner near the Divine Tower, dark purple ripples suddenly appeared. Wuming, Gadotsi, Matthew, Anna, Merlin, and Ishtar, who was very reluctant but didn't dare to say anything, walked out of it. Although Ishtar was very reluctant, Wuming ordered her to come with them, saying that she had to discuss with Gilgamesh about the crusade against the monsters. Although the price was that Ishtar had been verbally attacking Wuming along the way, after arriving at the jungle in the southwest, Wuming and Ishtar were alone for a while. Gadotsi and the others didn't know what happened, but Ishtar became much more obedient after returning to the team. After that, Wuming found Anna, but because he still didn't see the Quetzalcoatl, Wuming left a message and took the 5 of them back to Uruk through the portal. Oh. Once again, we reached our destination in an instant. Gadotsi exclaimed in surprise. No matter when I see it, Senior Villo's ability is always so magical. Matthew seemed to be enjoying himself. BZZT. Every time you enter this strange space, the connection between you and Chaldea will become abnormal. BZT. Roman's voice was heard from Gadotsi's bracelet along with the abnormal signal. Villo's ability is probably different from spatial magic and teleportation magic. It's not something that humans can use, so it's normal that Chaldea can't detect it. Even Merlin was very interested in Wuming's ability. If he didn't know that Wuming would be perfunctory, he would have asked him a long time ago. Anyway, it's better to be able to get to our destination as soon as possible. Anna sighed. She looked quite tired. She couldn't help it. She was only there to help, and after a long journey to the jungle in the southwest, she was left alone, although she was the one who asked for it. After that, before she could see the Quetzalcoatl, and before she could do anything useful, she was picked up by Wuming and returned to Uruk. Anyone would be unhappy if they were in her shoes. Mama! Anna, don't be sad. Returning to Uruk means that you can eat delicious buttercake for dinner. Merlin, who thought he was showing a kind big brother smile, looked at Anna as if she was a kidnapper. Gadotsi and Matthew couldn't help but protect Anna behind them, watching Merlin with vigilance. You look very suspicious, Merlin. Mr. Merlin, please behave yourself. The two were like parents protecting their child, and they mocked Merlin with disdain. This made Merlin feel quite hurt. You are being disdained, Merlin. Wuming also joined in. Ma! Merlin didn't know what to say. He could only smile and shrug his shoulders. After a few seconds of silence, everyone couldn't help but burst into laughter. It's important to be able to maintain a happy mood in the singularity, but you guys shouldn't always bully Merlin, because I always feel the same way. This was the speech of Roman from Chaldea, who was given a pessimist, a coward, and other negative titles by a large number of servants. Huh, what is this speech of a soft-footed shrimp that does not know how to read the atmosphere? Said Ishtar, in a rare moment. After all, after being taught a lesson by Wuming, Ishtar didn't speak again, or rather, she didn't dare to speak again. However, when Ishtar opened her mouth, she was still annoyed. By the way, what's the matter with the tent? There were no tents in Mesopotamia before I left. Wuming suddenly remembered the temporary residences that Nuwakamaru commanded the soldiers to build before. Those residences were all tents, which gave people the feeling of a military camp. After all, Mesopotamia was made of clay, and the materials and cloth needed for tents were still scarce. However, if Gilgamesh wanted to, he could definitely invent such a thing. But even if there was, most of the tents would be replaced with sheepskin. However, that would be a little bit extravagant, and it might not make ends meet. That was why there were no tents in Mesopotamia. About that, I heard that it was an invention brought by Zhuge Kong Ming's military advisor. Matthew heard some rumors about it. Some people said that it was contributed by the king's military advisor. In other words, the main consciousness of Zhuge Kong Ming is Ermero too? Gadotsi was stunned. If the other party brought an item that didn't exist in this era, then why couldn't they determine the other party's background before? No, it's hard to say. Zhuge Kong Ming also had tents during the Three Kingdoms period. After all, the army needed to be stationed when marching to war. Wu Ming thought of such a possibility. If you think about it carefully, it really doesn't look like something like a modern tent. Matthew nodded. Moreover, in Matthew's opinion, whether it was Ermero II or Zhuge Kong Ming who was the main consciousness, both of them could do this. After all, no matter who was the main consciousness, both of them had knowledge about military tents. Both of them could use their professional skills to create military tents, which were convenient places to live in the wild. It was better to teach a man how to fish than to give him a fish. After making a sample, the construction method would be taught to the soldiers, and then all they needed to do was mass-produce the materials. What is the background of that person? Merlin must know, but he didn't tell us. What a disappointment. Gadotsi let out a sad cry and looked at Merlin with complaining eyes. After all, if Merlin told the truth, they wouldn't be so concerned. Ha ha ha. Don't worry, it's best to find out for yourself, and we'll be able to see the other party soon, so there's no need to rush. Merlin was still thick-skinned. Sure enough, Merlin is terrible. As expected of Anna, her words were still so sharp. As if ignoring Roman, the few of them chatted as they slowly walked towards the divine pagoda. Only Roman, who was in Chaldea, looked like he couldn't be revived. So I've been ignored. After that, Leonardo da Vinci, who was drinking coffee, smiled helplessly. You have to pull yourself together, Romani. You have to eat your own fruit. Although Leonardo da Vinci's eyes were overflowing with joy. Yes, while Roman was being comforted by Leonardo da Vinci, because the location of the portal was very close to the Tower of God, Wu Ming and the others had already stepped into the Tower of God. The soldiers they met along the way all showed surprise and respect to Wu Ming and Ishtar, but after seeing that the two brought people from the Chaldean embassy, they were worried that their greetings would delay the other party's important matters, so the soldiers didn't say anything to Wu Ming and Ishtar. However, they also bowed respectfully to Wu Ming and Ishtar before they obediently left. Sure enough, assassin as a Hyunryong is very popular in the Uruk. After another soldier silently left, Gadotsi suddenly spoke. After all, I'm a Uruk Hyunryong, and I'm completely different from Ishtar when I'm a god. I've always taken care of the humans. Seems like that's true. Matthew recalled the situation just now. The soldiers were indeed very respectful to Wu Ming and Ishtar, but the way they looked at the two of them was different. They were respectful and grateful to Wu Ming from the bottom of their hearts. But when the soldiers looked at Ishtar, it was as if they were looking at a high and mighty god who could not be offended. Although both were respectful, they were actually not the same. Ahem. But I can see that the Uruk soldiers also respect you, Miss Ishtar, Matthew immediately added after being pushed by Gadotsi. However, this could not cover up the fact that even Ishtar had to admit. However, this fact made Ishtar even angrier. So what if it's different? I don't need their respect anyway. The humans only need to offer me gems and gold. Humph. Ishtar said as she sped up and walked toward the room at the top, where Gilgamesh was dealing with matters. This made everyone feel ashamed. Don't worry about her. She'll be fine after a while. Let's go. The place where Gil is dealing with matters is right in front of us. According to the current situation of this world, he should be staying there forever. When they arrived at the door at the top of the Divine Tower, the soldiers guarding the door were shocked when they saw Wu Ming and Ishtar. They immediately knelt down respectfully. Lord Hyunryong, Lord Ishtar, welcome back to the Uruk. Wu Ming had indeed left because of the battle with Gorgon, and Ishtar had left the Uruk because she was always running around. She was often not in the Uruk. In short, the two of them were indeed welcome back. Is the king inside? Wu Ming asked the two soldiers who stood up. Yes, Lord Hyunryong. King Gilgamesh is dealing with matters. Lord Siduri and Lord Baiqing are also inside. However, This was just a routine inquiry. After all, the door was so big that Wooming had already seen the situation inside. Gilgamesh sat on the throne, constantly picking up and putting down the slate and quickly dealing with matters. Siduri stood beside Gilgamesh to help record things. As for Musasobo Benkei, he stood under the throne with his eyes closed, waiting quietly. "Let's go," Wooming said as he took the lead and walked into the room at the top of the divine tower where Gilgamesh dealt with government affairs. Chapter 9:31. On the king's throne, Gilgamesh, assisted by Siduri, was efficiently handling the various matters on the clay tablets. "Oh, Hyunryong, you're back." Even when he saw that the visitor was Wooming, Gilgamesh didn't put down the clay tablet in his hand. Instead, he looked at the clay tablet while chatting with Wooming. Siduri slightly bowed to Wooming and Ishtar. She couldn't interrupt the conversation between the king and the god at this moment. Moreover, she still needed to classify the clay tablets that Gilgamesh processed, so she couldn't get away for a while. "After all, I was tricked by Gorgon. How can I not come back?" Wooming responded to Gilgamesh with a gentle smile. "Ah, yes, it's not in your character to not respond to Gorgon." Gilgamesh put down the clay tablet in his hand. This was the last one that needed to be processed. Afterward, Gilgamesh raised his head and looked at Wooming, one high and one low, and smiled. If people who didn't know saw this scene, they would probably think that this was a beautiful scene of the king and his subjects having a heart-to-heart talk. However, Gadotsi felt that something was wrong. It was as if Gorgon, who Wooming and Gilgamesh were thinking about, was going to be in big trouble. Then, Gilgamesh looked at Siduri, who had already sorted the clay tablets. Siduri passed the processed clay tablets to the various departments. "Yes, king, I'll do it right away." After Siduri bowed, she and the guards ran down from the king's throne with a portion of the clay tablets. Just when she passed by Wooming and Ishtar, Siduri paused again and bowed to the two of them. Unlike Gilgamesh, Siduri still respected the gods, especially the Uruk Hyunryong and the Uruk city god Ishtar. "Oh, isn't this the stupid goddess who ran away from home? How did you know to come back today?" Gilgamesh tilted his body and supported his chin with one hand, as if he had just noticed Ishtar. His tone was full of sarcasm. Ishtar would definitely explode if she heard Gilgamesh's words, but Wooming glared at Ishtar, indicating that she shouldn't mess around and stay put. Like a powder keg that had expanded to the limit but couldn't explode, Ishtar pouted, clasped her hands, and turned her head away. There was even a faint mist above her head. "Oh, looks like you've trained this stupid goddess well, Hyunryong." Gilgamesh was surprised by Ishtar's forbearance. Although he didn't show it on his face, Gilgamesh was actually very surprised. After all, anyone who knew Ishtar knew that she and Gilgamesh were the most incompatible. Even Wooming's relationship with Ishtar was better than Gilgamesh's relationship with Ishtar. But in the face of Gilgamesh's sarcasm and ridicule, Ishtar actually endured it. If it weren't for the fact that Ishtar's divinity in front of him really belonged to Ishtar, Gilgamesh would have thought that someone was pretending to be Ishtar. "I just used some small tricks, king. I think if it were you, you'd have guessed my tricks even if I tried to hide them." In an instant, Gilgamesh understood what Wooming meant by tricks. It was nothing more than starting with Ishtar's weakness, probably using money to coerce her. That was indeed the case. When Ishtar knew that she would be forced by Wooming to follow him to the Uruk, Ishtar cursed Wooming and all kinds of rumors and slanders blurted out. Although it wasn't to an amazing extent, after Gadotsi, Matthew, and others heard it, it could be said that it changed the image of Ishtar in their hearts. After that, Wooming briefly separated Ishtar from the crowd in the southwest jungle. During this period, Wooming said something to Ishtar. "If you can listen to me obediently and keep your mouth shut, I will fight for a tenth of the Babylon treasury for you as your reward." This made Ishtar's eyes suddenly shine, but Wooming's request was not that simple. "Of course, if you can hold back when facing Gil, I will fight for a tenth of the Babylon treasury for you as an additional reward. However, if you don't listen to me and can't hold back, all these rewards will be canceled, and your original rewards will be reduced by half." The first half of the sentence made Ishtar's eyes shine even brighter, but the second half of the sentence made Ishtar's eyes shine even brighter. Ishtar began to calculate in her heart. If everything went well, she could finally get 25% of the treasures in the Babylon treasury, which was a quarter. However, if it didn't go well, she could only get less than 10% of the treasures, which was directly reduced from a quarter to a 20th. It's easy, right? Just don't lose your temper and be obedient, and you will have a chance to get 25% of the treasures in the Babylon treasury. If you lose your temper and don't listen to me, you will only be left with 5% of the treasures. Although 5% of the treasures is indeed a lot, it is not even 10%. TSK, TSK. Wuming's words echoed around Ishtar, whose eyes began to spin. Gradually, Ishtar, who could not resist the temptation, chose to fall into the devil's trap. Ishtar covered her head, and her eyes were downcast as she finally made the final decision. I know. I will be obedient. The power of money once again played its role. In short, Gilgamesh's guess was not far from the truth. Gadotsi and the others thought that Ishtar had become so obedient because of the influence of the forced contract. Who would have thought that Wuming would still use money and treasures to make Ishtar choose to compromise? This king is so happy today. This king will not pursue the crime of abducting Chaldea that this king sent to support the Quetzalcoatl. Gilgamesh could not help but look at the Chaldea led by Gadotsi. Although they were Chaldea, only Gadotsi and Matthew could be considered as Chaldea's people. Anna was brought by Merlin, and Merlin was only sent by Gilgamesh to support Gadotsi and Matthew. Although Olga Marie and her vampire follower Parmelia had completed their seclusion at the end of the previous singularity, according to Roman's explanation, the Holy Grail that sealed the entire concept of Florence underwent a mutation. Something followed the demon god Pillar Florence and groped its way to Chaldea. Chapter 9:32. Although Chaldea was located in the Antarctic continent, other than Chaldea, all other places were burned by Gidea. Therefore, Chaldea, which survived under the influence of the magnetic field, could be said to be an alternative singularity. When everyone in the world is crazy and only one person is sober, the one who is sober is the crazy one. That was more or less the case. When the whole world was burned by Gidea, Chaldea, which was lucky enough to survive, became an existence similar to a singularity. To put it simply, Chaldea could no longer be regarded as an institution that still existed in the Antarctic continent. Chaldea should be treated as an existence similar to other singularities. Therefore, if someone wanted to invade Chaldea, they must first find Chaldea. However, this was full of difficulties. The reason why Chaldea was able to discover singularities was because Chaldea had three important things: Earth Environment Model, Chaldea Yasnir Future Observation Lens, Sheba's Psychic Calculation Device, Trismegistes. With the cooperation of the three, singularities could be discovered, and through Chaldea's psychic transfer technology, human masters could be sent to various eras. If one wanted to discover the location of Chaldea, they probably didn't need to go through so much trouble. However, Chaldea wasn't easy to discover either. However, probably because Chaldea took in Floros, who was sealed in the Golden Holy Grail by Wuming, some unknown existence used this as a medium to discover Chaldea. Currently, it was on its way to Chaldea. The existence in a certain location was probably Gidea. Wuming thought so. However, Wuming thought that this was impossible. Floros was sealed by his own power. Coupled with the influence of Chaldea's magnetic field, it was impossible for Gidea to discover him. Unless Gaia had become even more powerful, she would be able to find the current location of Floros through her previous relationship with him. Fortunately, because Chaldea's equipment was quite advanced, they discovered it in time. After that, Olga Marie used her half-mature third method to cooperate with her vampire follower, Parmelia, to add an additional layer of seal to the Holy Grail that sealed Floros, preventing the unknown existence from advancing. However, The price was that Olga Marie and Parmelia couldn't leave the golden holy grail that sealed Floros for the time being. Therefore, Roman was still the commander, and Parmelia couldn't go to the singularity in Mesopotamia with Gadotsi and Matthew. However, if Olga Marie was the commander in Chaldea, there was a high chance that she would quarrel with Gilgamesh. After all, with Olga Marie's temper, how could she tolerate Gilgamesh making Gadotsi and Matthew spend so much time doing odd jobs? Fortunately, Roman was the temporary commander. After all, Roman's personality was more gentle. For example, at this moment, Roman, who was monitoring in Chaldea, was in a mess because of Gilgamesh's speech. What should we do? Leonardo da Vinci? I guess that King Gilgamesh would be angry? On the contrary, Leonardo da Vinci was quite calm. Isn't the Villo still with Tachika and the others? Don't worry, Wuming wouldn't let Gadotsi and Matthew be punished. But in fact, Gilgamesh had no intention of punishing the two at all. However, he still had to say what needed to be said. Wuming walked in front of Gadotsi and Matthew and looked at Gilgamesh defensively. I was the one who made them change their plan, and they also had a part to play in getting Ishtar to join us. Yes, this can be considered as making up for their mistakes. Merlin also stood beside Gadotsi and the others and said something good. Hell, although Ishtar is a stupid goddess, she is still somewhat useful. However, it is true that she has violated this king's will, and Hyunryong was the one who instigated her to do so. Logically speaking, she should be guilty of the same crime. Hearing this, Ishtar, whose back was facing Gilgamesh, tried her best to hold back her anger. In the end, she couldn't stand it anymore and said, "I'm going out for a walk, Uruk. Don't worry about me." Then she flew away. You stupid goddess. Gilgamesh's anger was completely understandable. That's right. Ishtar summoned the horse Anna to break through the ceiling again. This king will remember it on your head, Hyunryong. Gilgamesh stared at Wuming with annoyance. However, this king will not delay the proper business. That will be your punishment. In fact, Gilgamesh often used his clairvoyance to see things when he took a short break. Coincidentally, Gilgamesh inadvertently saw the matter between Wuming and Gadotsi and the others. Therefore, Gilgamesh knew very well that Gadotsi and Matthew did not actually see the contents of the slate that he asked the small pterosaur to send to the south. In fact, Gilgamesh only wanted to train Gadotsi and Matthew. After all, the two of them were really immature and needed more training. Gilgamesh once heard from Merlin that Gadotsi and Matthew had received a lot of help from Wuming along the way. The two of them missed a lot of opportunities to train. Although this did make the path they took less difficult, Gilgamesh would make up for the lack of training along the way in his Uruk for Gadotsi and Matthew. It is true that you did not follow this king's orders. Now, listen to this king of Chaldea. Gilgamesh's voice suddenly became louder, which made Gadotsi and Matthew straighten their backs. It seemed that they were going to be punished. Yes, Gadotsi and Matthew responded in unison. You have indeed made a certain contribution in welcoming back the Uruk god, but you did not have the slightest effect on stopping the demonic beasts that crossed over the northwest mountains. Therefore, your merits cannot offset your faults. Siduri will arrange a new task for you later. Now, go back to your Chaldean embassy and rest. Gadotsi and Matthew, who originally thought that they would be severely punished by Gilgamesh, were stunned. The punishment given by Gilgamesh was probably quite mild. Is there a problem? Seeing the two stunned, Gilgamesh looked down at them with his scarlet eyes. This cold and harsh gaze made Gadotsi and Matthew come back to their senses. Yes, no problem. Gilgamesh nodded with satisfaction, then looked at Merlin and Anna. Merlin, this king does not want to comment on your dereliction of duty. You will be punished the same as Chaldea. As for Anna, that's it. You may leave. Chapter 9:33. Yes, thank you, King Gilgamesh, for your magnanimity. Merlin bowed to Gilgamesh with his cane, but he didn't leave. Instead, he stood aside and waited quietly. Anna didn't speak. She just bowed slightly to Gilgamesh, then left the throne room. She was just a follower abducted by Merlin. It was only because of the agreement with Merlin that Anna obediently stayed in Uruk. And Gilgamesh also recognized Anna's identity. Therefore, the bow to Gilgamesh was just for show. More importantly, compared to the throne room, which was filled with the unique aura of clay tablets, she preferred the flower shop owned by a kind old lady in Uruk. Not only because of the fragrance of the flower shop, but also because Anna felt warmth in the flower shop. At this time, Matthew stood up and asked, "That King Gilgamesh, v. Hyunryong, where is Sir? Is he not with us?" It seemed that Matthew was still a little unaccustomed to Wu Ming's name in this singularity. Gadotzi was also concerned about Wu Ming's punishment. After all, only Wu Ming wasn't punished or ordered by Gilgamesh. How could she rest assured? This king and Hyunryong have other important matters to discuss. You don't have to ask. However, immediately afterward, Merlin leaned over to Gadotzi and Matthew and whispered. Ignoring Merlin's actions, Gilgamesh turned his head and looked at Musasobo Benkei, who stood aside without saying a word. Also, Lackner, Musasobo Benkei, who was silent and seemingly inconspicuous, responded to Gilgamesh. "Yes, King Gilgamesh, Lackner Musasobo Benkei is here." With one hand on the razor, Musasobo Benkei knelt on one knee in front of Gilgamesh. As you can see, Hyunryong and others have resolved the crisis in the northwest and returned to Uruk. You can rest assured. Yes, King Gilgamesh. Musasobo Benkei looked a little absent-minded. With the strength of his legs, Musasobo Benkei quickly returned to the Uruk to report to Gilgamesh. However, when Musasobo Benkei met with Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh calmly told Musasobo Benkei not to worry. Hyunryong and Ishtar have already resolved it. You just wait here. After Gilgamesh left such a sentence, Musasobo Benkei was left in the throne of the God Tower by Gilgamesh. This made Musasobo Benkei feel quite conflicted. As for what he was conflicted about, to be honest, Musasobo Benkei didn't know himself. Ever since he escaped from Operation Decapitation, Musasobo Benkei felt a little lost in his heart. Musasobo Benkei feared that history would repeat itself. Although he did save Nuwakamaru, that was only because Nuwakamaru was close to him. As a subject, he couldn't watch Nuwakamaru die at such a close distance. However, in other words, if the distance was far, perhaps Musasobo Benkei would abandon Nuwakamaru and escape alone, just like Lord Haifeng of Chonglu who abandoned the Minamoto Sutra and escaped. He didn't want to see that scene and didn't want history to repeat itself. However, he was indeed afraid of facing the demonic beast commander. Regarding this, Musasobo Benkei was confused. Gilgamesh, who saw Musasobo Benkei's confusion, lost interest in Musasobo Benkei. No matter what, a soldier could only be called a qualified soldier if he was undistracted. The Uruk soldiers were full of faith in fighting against the demonic beasts and protecting their families. As for Musasobo Benkei, although he was stronger than the Uruk soldiers, his heart was not firm. Gilgamesh definitely wouldn't use such a person. If he gave an important mission to him, it would definitely ruin things in the end. Moreover, the risk brought by Musasobo Benkei's confusion was far more than that. At present, it was just that there was no fuse. If there was a fuse, the impact of the explosion would make Musasobo Benkei leave the Uruk silently like a walking corpse. Although he would eventually recover as a heroic spirit, the danger brought by the demonic beasts was too dangerous. The lack of any combat power would put the human side at a disadvantage. Therefore, Gilgamesh couldn't leave Musasobo Benkei alone. Keeping Musasobo Benkei was the temporary solution to deal with this unstable factor. Speaking of unstable factors, Ibaraki Boy, who escaped and occupied the mountain, was also one of them. 3 months ago, Ibaraki Boy was among the 10 servants who carried out the beheading operation. Gilgamesh couldn't help but recall the situation at that time, because the situation at that time was very bad. After one of the demonic beast commanders, Mushio and Hushio, attacked the Uruk, and Okitasoki's spiritual base collapsed and left, Gilgamesh immediately planned the beheading operation against the demonic beast commander. He summoned servants to form an assassination team to assassinate the demonic beast commander. The strength of the servants only needed to be able to get close to and kill the demonic beast commander, because this was a group of Suicide Squad. And Gilgamesh's Suicide Squad certainly couldn't let go of Ibaraki Boy, who was still occupying the mountain. Therefore, Gilgamesh summoned 7 new servants early in the morning and let Shiro Amakusa lead the team to carry out the plan to kill Ibaraki Boy. Ibaraki Boy was a super unstable factor. Even if he didn't join the Suicide Squad as a consumable, he couldn't be left alive and must be eliminated. And Shiro Amakusa and the others, because Zhuge Kongming followed them, plus the strength of the servants, they directly captured Ibaraki Boy and brought him back to the Uruk. After setting a curse on Ibaraki Boy's spiritual base that could make it explode, Ibaraki Boy naturally entered the Suicide Squad and carried out the beheading operation. This was probably what was meant by waste. By the way, during the beheading operation, Ibaraki Boy was in the same team as Bayuzin and Shiro Amakusa. After all, even if the curse was used to threaten Ibaraki Boy's spiritual base, it couldn't be considered that everything was fine. Ibaraki Boy was a berserker. Therefore, Ibaraki Boy formed a team with 2 rather steady people. Those 2 people were Bayuzin and Shiro Amakusa. However, even if there were 2 steady people watching over Ibaraki Boy still made a mess in the end. Bayuzin and one of the demonic beast commanders, the Scorpion Man Kitabluru, died together. Chapter 9:34. Because of Ibaraki Dojo's mischief, the Scorpion Man Kitabluru used his stinger to hit Bayuchian, causing Bayuchian to be seriously injured. Bayuchian knew that his spirit core had been destroyed, so he decided to take Kitabluru down with him. As for Ibaraki Dojo, Shiro Amakusa definitely wouldn't let him go. Although the servants who carried out the decapitation operation didn't think of returning to Uruk alive, killing a few more demonic beast commanders was good. In the end, because of Ibaraki Dojo's influence, Bayuchian had no choice but to take Ibaraki Dojo down with him. If it wasn't for the insurance method engraved on Ibaraki Dojo's spirit core, exploding to cover for Shiro Amakusa, allowing Shiro Amakusa to take the opportunity to escape from the demonic beast horde, he probably wouldn't have been able to escape. Again, they were a Suicide Squad. After agreeing to Gilgamesh's plan, the servants who carried out the decapitation operation had already disregarded life and death. The reason why Shiro Amakusa cherished his life so much was because he had to do his best to kill as many demonic beast commanders as possible. Everything was for the sake of humanity. It turned out that the servants were worthy of being called heroes in human history. Yagyu, one of the strongest swordsmen in the Jianghu era, Ma Shou, Zhongmo, and the ancestor of martial arts in the East, Kasalaku, worked together to kill Kasalaku, who had great brute strength. However, the 2 of them were also seriously injured. Extreme strength could overwhelm all techniques, and that was what Kasalaku did. Although the 2 spirit cores were intact, their spirit cores were completely destroyed. They were completely defeated by the remaining demonic beasts. Fuma Kotaro and Katu Duanzo, who were also wind demon ninjas, used ninjutsu to deal with the formless Umu Dao, who was known as the Tempest. However, with the help of Shiro Amakusa, the 3 of them managed to kill Umu Darutu by taking him down with them. However, although the servants were killing one by one, the demonic beast commanders weren't that easy to kill. Even with Zhuge Kongming's plan, which scattered the demonic beast commanders one by one and catching them off guard, the servants still managed to kill the demonic beast commanders by taking them down with them. However, at this time, the other demonic beast commanders finally discovered the problem. So, the demonic beast commanders began to surround the remaining servants and surround them, preparing to annihilate them in one fell swoop. At that time, through the connection between Gilgamesh and the servants, Gilgamesh remotely received the news that several demonic beast commanders were successfully killed, but at the same time, he lost contact with those servants. No one knew what Gilgamesh was thinking at that time. He was still dealing with government affairs. Gilgamesh knew very well that the servants he sent out had no ability to break through the encirclement of countless demonic beasts. Even if they could break through the encirclement, they would still be hunted down by the demonic beasts. There was no way they would be able to return to the North Wall in time. And Gilgamesh wouldn't deploy a large number of soldiers to support a few servants, because it was likely that a large number of soldiers would be sacrificed. However, because the strength of these servants was not enough, Gilgamesh could maintain so many servants at one time. If they were like Wuming, the amount of servants he provided would be more than enough for Gilgamesh to go to the underworld. However, although Gilgamesh's heart was heavy, he didn't regret it. The so-called heroic spirits were existences that fought for the future of humanity. They were existences that risked everything for the sake of humanity. The so-called Suicide Squad proved this point. It was precisely because they understood that they would not be able to return that the servants agreed to form a Suicide Squad. Fortunately, Gadotsi and the others came late. If they came early, perhaps they wouldn't have allowed such a thing to happen. After all, whether it was Gadotsi or Matthew, they were quite emotional people. However, it was precisely because of such human beings that the servants rushed into the demonic beasts without hesitation. Glancing at Gadotsi and Matthew, who continued to whisper to Merlin, Gilgamesh showed a puzzled look. After returning to his senses, Gilgamesh looked at Musasobo Benkei again. The fact that Musasobo Benkei and Nuwakamaru could survive was also within Gilgamesh's expectation. He saw it through his clairvoyance. Berserker Darius III, who teamed up with Musasobo Benkei and Nuwakamaru, was accidentally discovered by the demonic beast commander. Nuwakamaru wanted to kill the demonic beast commander recklessly. Musasobo Benkei had a fear of death, but because he was unwilling to abandon his former master in front of him to die again, he resolutely took Nuwakamaru and fled the battlefield when Darius III couldn't hold on anymore. They successfully survived along the Tigris River. However, Nuwakamaru, who survived, regained her fighting spirit. In order to make up for her failure, she continued to work hard under Gilgamesh to complete the tasks given to her by Gilgamesh. Since then, Musasobo Benkei had changed. To put it nicely, he had lost the motivation to continue fighting. To put it bluntly, he had become a soulless zombie. At this moment, Musasobo Benkei's expression was like this. Seeing this scene, Gilgamesh couldn't help but frown. But this doesn't mean that this king doesn't need to set up a stronghold in the northwest. Set off immediately and return to the temporary stronghold in the northwest. Rendezvous with Ryder and wait for this king's subsequent orders. Sure enough, Gilgamesh couldn't stand such an expression. It was too disgusting. A hero who left his name in human history should look like a hero. Yes, King Gilgamesh, Musasobo Benkei replied, then left the tower without stopping. Then, Gilgamesh looked at Merlin, Gadotsi, and Matthew, who were still muttering nonstop. What are you muttering about? Return to the Chaldean embassy and rest as soon as possible. Yes, then, King, I'll take my leave first. But Tachika and Matthew seem to have something to discuss with you and Lord Hyunryong. I won't disturb you. Merlin finished speaking and left by himself. Is that so? Gilgamesh looked at Gadotsi and Matthew. Then, what else do you want? That. Gadotsi smiled awkwardly. What was there to discuss? Merlin clearly said that he could see Zhuge Kongming if he stayed, but in the end, he sold her and Matthew out. Why don't we let Tachika follow? After all, she is Chaldea's ambassador to Uruk. Wuming suggested half-jokingly. Some things could indeed involve Chaldea's people. Forget it. This king is in a good mood today. This king and Hyunryong are going somewhere. If you don't want to return to the Chaldean embassy to rest, you can choose to follow. Gadotsi and Matthew's eyes lit up. If Merlin was right, they should be able to see Zhuge Kongming next. Yes, King Gilgamesh. It would be our pleasure. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.